Good morning, students. Wish you all a very happy Diwali and happy Govardhan Bhaiya Dooj. So it was a festive weekend. Students, I hope you have enjoyed a lot this festive time. And now the time has come when you again come back to the studies, right, with full force. So students, today we are going to discuss an important standard, which is highly important for becoming a chartered accountant and after becoming a chartered accountant, right? So this standard, again, I'm repeating, this standard is important for becoming a CA and after becoming a CA. Okay. So Ind AS 116 leases. Yes, we are going to talk about leases. Students, we will be covering this standard in 15 hours. We will be taking 5 classes to complete this standard, right? We'll discuss the concepts. Then we will discuss the practical aspects in the real world. And we will do a lot of questions from the study material, right? ICAI material. So in the next 5 classes, we will discuss a lot of nuances on this leases standard, right? Friends, this is an asset as well as liability related standard. This is an important standard. This is a highly detailed and pretty lengthy standard. And that is why we are going to cover this standard in the 5 classes, okay? Very, very important from the exam perspective, very, very important from the interview perspective, very, very important from the real life application perspective, right? Very important standard, highly important standard, okay? Sure, you will get a question from this standard in exam, right? Probably the question could be 10 to 15 marks. Okay. Let's begin the journey of learning Ind AS 116. I can see a lot of students have joined so far. So good morning, Anila ji. Good morning, Tushar. Good morning, Hemant. Good morning, Vignesh. One participant had joined with the name of DP. I don't know who's that participant. So let me see who all have joined on the portal. Good morning, Rajat, Radhika. So good morning, everyone. Good morning, guys. Friends, talking about this Ind AS 116 leases, right? So before coming to Ind AS 116 leases, I'll discuss what was there in Indian regime, what was there internationally, what is there internationally, and what is there in Ind AS in India, right? First, I will take some time on talking on the concepts. Then I'll come back to the discussion on the main standard, and then I'll discuss with the help of few illustrations, okay? Friends, in India, we have accounting standard 19. You all are aware about AS 19, leases standard? You all are aware or not aware? Aware, okay. Accounting standard talks about lease accounting. Lease accounting means accounting in the books of lessee, accounting in the books of lessor. Right? In a lease agreement, there are two parties. In our day-to-day life, we call it as a tenant and landlord. So many of you in the real life acting in the capacity of a landlord. If you have your own house and you have let out your house, you are a landlord, right? Many of you who came to Delhi or who have went to metro cities for the CA preparation, probably you are living in a rented accommodation. In that, in real world, you are acting in the capacity of a tenant. That tenant is called as a lessee. That landlord is called as a lessor. Right? There are two parties. So AS 19 covers the accounting in the books of landlord and in the books of tenant. But in technical world, in the accounting standard language, we call it as a lessee and we call it as a lessor. Okay. So AS 19 covers the accounting. And when I say accounting, it covers 4 aspects. What are those 4 aspects? Can anyone tell me the 4 pillars of accounting? Can anyone tell me the 4 pillars of accounting? I'm waiting. Very good. RMPD. Very good. Hemant, Vignesh, DP. Great. Recognition, measurement, presentation, disclosure. Accounting standard 19 talks about recognition, measurement, presentation, disclosure of lease contract in the books of lessee and in the books of lessor. Okay. Friends, Ind AS were notified on 16 February 2015. In India, Ind AS become part of India corporate journey from the financial year 16-17 on a mandatory basis. Okay. And of course, the applicability roadmap was there. So Ind AS was notified on 16 February 2015. At that point of time, Ind AS 116 was not notified because Ind AS 116 does not exist at that point of time. Okay, even globally. At that point of time, Ind AS 17 was notified. Ind AS 17, which talks about leases, which talks about lease accounting. Friends, globally, at that point of time, International Accounting Standard 17 was there globally. Okay. And you understand our Ind AS are Indianized version of IFRS applicable to India. Ind AS are Indianized version of IFRS applicable to India. You all agree with me? Because we have a converged IFRS in India, and the converged IFRS in India is equal to Indian Accounting Standard. So globally, there was International Accounting Standard 17, and we have Ind AS 17. Ind AS 17 was largely aligned to Accounting Standard 19. Okay. Friends, if we talk about lease accounting globally, the standard setters, globally the regulators were not comfortable with the lease accounting as per the old standards. Okay. Why? I will discuss and I will prove that why. Friends, in 2005, Securities and Exchange Commission of USA, like in India, we have a SEBI, Securities and Exchange Board of India. In USA, it is a Security and Exchange Commission of USA. Securities and Exchange Commission of USA found that approximate $3 trillion of assets and liabilities were sitting outside the books of listed companies. Were sitting outside the book. Okay. So one student had just joined and she is asking, sir, what is going on? So in Ind AS 116, we are discussing and I'm just telling you a story, right? I will narrate the story in next 2-3 minutes and then I'll come to the concept because this story is important to understand Ind AS 116. Securities and Exchange Commission of USA, right? When they are looking at the balance sheet of listed companies, they found that approximate $3 trillion worth of assets and liabilities are sitting outside the books, outside the balance sheet. You know what is the GDP of India? Can anyone tell me the GDP of India? Yes, it is close to $3 trillion. So close to India's GDP was sitting outside the balance sheet of listed companies of USA. Why? They found that this lease accounting standard, due to this lease accounting standard, appropriate recognition of assets and liabilities, lease assets and liabilities were not there. Why? Let me discuss that. Friends, if a person who is buying or a company who is buying an asset, okay, who is buying an asset from their own funds, the company will show that asset as an asset in the balance sheet. And of course, if it is buying from the own funds, the funds will flow. The cash assets will go down and the other assets will go up. If a company will buy an asset and take a loan, like somebody is buying a home and taking a home loan, home will come in the balance sheet. That flat building comes as an asset in the balance sheet, and that loan will come as a what? As a liability in the balance sheet. Loan will come as a liability in the balance sheet. Okay. If a company is buying a house or company is buying a flat or a building, the company is getting a right to use, correct? Because the company is the owner. If a company is buying a house and taking a loan, again, the company is getting a right to use of that house. The companies get a control, right? Instead of taking a loan, the company decided to take this asset on a lease basis. Decided to take this asset on a lease basis, right? Friends, lease is another source of financing. Lease is another prominent source of financing. Instead of paying EMIs, instead of paying the monthly installments, the company decided to pay monthly rentals. The company took the building on a lease for 10 years. Friends, in this case, will the company, according to AS 19 or the previous Ind AS 17, will the company show this building as an asset in their books of accounts and the lease liability as a liability? What is your view? I'm asking about AS 19 because you all are CA final students. You guys know AS 19. Hemant is saying, sir, it's an operating lease. It is not an asset. Very good, Hemant. This was the concept of AS 19, and typically the same concept was there in the old International Accounting Standard 17 and old Ind AS 17. Right. Hemant, don't you think that even though this company got a building for a lease of 10 years, don't you think this company got a right to use that building for 10 years? Yeah? For 10 years? Yes. For example, I'm living in a rented accommodation. I'm living in a rented flat. I'm paying rent on a monthly basis to my landlord, my lessor. I'm a lessee. So I'm getting a full right to use that house. Okay. Even though my landlord, my lessor is the owner of this house, but he cannot enter into my house. I mean to say, he cannot enter into his house without my permission during my lease period. Are you all agree with me? My landlord cannot call me at 11 in the night and he cannot say that, Alok, I am coming in my own house at 1 in the night. Can he say that? Answer is no. Answer is no. Right? Why? Because while I'm not the owner of that house, but I am having all the rights to use that house. I'm getting all the rights to use that house for the practical purposes. I believe we all are on the same page, right? Friends, in the first case, when the company bought the house, the company saw it as an asset. In the second case, when the company bought the house and the company took the loan, the company recognizes the asset as well as liability. In the third case, when the company took the house on a lease for 10 years, the company didn't recognize anything. While it was a non-cancelable lease. If at any point of time, the company breached the contract, the company vacated the house, the company has to pay. The company has to pay a lease rental equivalent to 10 years. Friends, don't you think it is a committed liability? Don't you think there is a right which is coming in to use that flat, use that building, use that house? Yeah. Friends, in the old international standard and in our existing accounting standard in India, we do not recognize right of use asset, and we do not recognize the lease liability, the committed lease liability. But we are disclosing this lease liability, this committed lease obligation as a disclosure in the notes to accounts. So somewhere we agree that we have a committed lease liability for a non-cancelable lease period of so much amount. And friends, Securities and Exchange Commission found that the balance sheets of the companies are not comparable. A company which is buying an asset and taking a loan, it is showing asset and liability both. But a company which is taking an asset on a lease basis, that company is not recognizing asset as well as liability, right? So the company, right, instead of taking a loan, the company started getting the assets on a lease basis so that their balance sheet will be shown as healthy balance sheet and this debt will not come into their balance sheet. So they found that the assets and liabilities worth $3 trillion is sitting outside the books of accounts. Okay. And friends, they decided, the Securities and Exchange Commission decided to change the US GAAP and also started this change project with the International Financial Reporting International Accounting Standard Board for changing this IFRS. And friends, with this International Accounting 17 was deleted and IFRS 16 was issued in 2019, effective from 1st January 2019. And friends, in India, we have also deleted Ind AS 17, which was notified on 16 February 2015. We have also deleted Ind AS 17, and we have also issued Ind AS 116 on 30th March 2019 via MCA notification, and this Ind AS 116 was made applicable from 1st April 2019. Okay. I believe you guys have understood the concept why this Ind AS 116 was issued, why this IFRS 16 was issued. I believe you guys have understood that. Correct? Is that right? Is that right, friends? Okay. So this is what I have discussed with all of you, my dear friends. If I talk about the 3 standard, which is always touching our lives as a chartered accountant, in India, we have old accounting standard. It is still applicable, right? Accounting standard 19, which is effective as on date. Globally, IAS 17, International Accounting Standard 17, was effective till 31st December 2018. And IFRS 16 was applicable from 1st January 2019. It is effective as on date. In India, if I talk about Indian accounting standard, Ind AS 17 was effective till 31st March 2019, because we are following financial year. Globally, calendar year is getting followed. Okay. And friends, from 1st April 2019, we have Ind AS 116 on our plate, and we have discarded Ind AS 17, which was the old converged IFRS, which was the old converged standard in India. Okay. So friends, today we have accounting standard 19, we have IFRS 16, we have Ind AS 116. And friends, earlier, if I talk about AS 19 versus Ind AS 17, there was hardly a difference. But if I talk about today's scenario, the difference between AS 19 and Ind AS 116, typically there is a huge difference between AS 19 and Ind AS 116. So students, if you are doing your articleship, okay, and you have 2 clients, one is in accounting standard and one is in Ind AS, and everyone has some leases, okay, you will find a huge difference in the recognition, measurement, presentation, disclosure of leases in the books of lessee in accounting standard and in Ind AS, right? Are we clear on the applicability? Are we clear on what standard we have? Yes, Ginny, Pooja, Hemant, DP.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Friends, as part of the agenda, it's a lengthy standard, long standard, right? And we have 5 days to cover this standard. Very, very important standard. Again, I'm repeating, this standard is important for becoming a chartered accountant and after becoming a chartered accountant. Okay. This standard will not leave you, and you should not leave this standard. Friends, of course, as a theoretical part, I'll touch upon the objective and scope. There's a recognition exemption I'll talk about. We'll discuss what is a lease, right? We'll spend a good time on the definition of lease. We'll talk about the whether arrangement contains a lease. We'll talk about if a company is entering into a purchase agreement, whether that purchase agreement is having a hidden lease agreement. We'll talk about that. Separation of lease and non-lease component. When you are taking a house on a lease basis, the landlord is saying, I'll give you the facility of cleaning facility, free made facility. So whether that lease includes a non-lease component also, we'll talk about that. And when 2 contracts can be combined and separated, we'll talk about that as well. Key concepts, we'll talk about the inception of the lease, commencement of the lease, what is meant by lease term, and we'll spend good time on this lease term concept. We'll also spend good time on lease payments. We'll talk about discount rate. We'll talk about initial direct cost, economic life, fair value. We'll discuss these concepts. Lessee accounting, highly important, and the entire lessee accounting has been changed in Ind AS 116, in IFRS 16 in comparison to the old standard. And lease liability in case of lessee accounting. We'll also talk about subsequent measurement. My dear friends, every asset has an initial measurement and subsequent measurement. Can someone tell me, Anila, can you explain what is meant by initial measurement and subsequent measurement? I'm not talking about Ind AS 116. I'm talking about initial measurement meaning and subsequent measurement meaning.
When the asset is purchased, it is the initial measurement, sir. Every year, what we, as on the balance sheet date, we will do subsequent measurements.
Very good. Very good. Friends, when asset got birth, right? The birth date is a initial measurement. And every birthday is a subsequent measurement. So this I'm talking about a child. But what about an asset? Birth date, when the asset is acquired or purchased, it is initial measurement. But when the reporting date comes, 31st March of every year, it is called as a subsequent measurement date, right? Very good, Anila, thank you. Remeasurement. We'll also talk about the remeasurement of lease assets and lease liability. We'll talk about the lease modifications when there is a change in the scope of the lease. We'll talk about some presentation and disclosure, right? Then friends, we'll discuss the lessor accounting as well. Lease classification in lessor accounting, finance lease, operating lease, modification, presentation and disclosure. And we'll talk about some other matters, which is sublease and sale and lease back, right? So we have a long agenda to cover in this 5 days, right? Let's move to the standard. And before that, let me move to the Excel file to discuss more about this right of use and this lease liability. Okay. Friends, I believe my Excel file is visible to everyone. So Hemant is asking, sir, in case of PPE, property, plant and equipment, we need to recognize initial cost as acquisition cost. Of course, Hemant, in PPE, we have discussed that initially PPE has to be measured at cost, and cost includes, we talked about the 3 leg, right? So you can refer the formula which is given in Ind AS 16. But you are right, whatever you have paid initially to acquire a PP is the acquisition cost. Friends, we discussed that today we have accounting standard 19 in AS on the leases, right? Then we have IFRS 16 globally. The name of the standard is Leases. And we have Ind AS 116 in India. We have 2 standards in India, AS 19 and Ind AS 116. Accounting standard 19 is on AS and Ind AS is on Ind AS, right? This is what we have today. Friends, in Ind AS 116 leases, let's discuss with the help of these 3 aspects, which I have already covered, that what is the accounting in case of AS 19 and old, Ind AS 17, old Ind AS 17, right? It was same. Friend, let's say Shruti has purchased a car from her own funds for rupees 10 lakhs, right? So what is going to be recognized here? Recognize the asset and reduce the own funds. This is what we have discussed. Recognize the asset and reduce her own funds. Tanisha has purchased a car by taking a car loan for rupees 10 lakhs. What is going to be recognized in this case? Recognize the asset and liability, as simple as that. Recognize the asset and liability. Geeta has taken a car on a lease basis for 3 years. What is going to be recognized in this case? No assets and liability. If it is in case it is an operating lease, right? We have two concepts, operating lease and finance lease, right? You understand operating lease and finance lease. So operating lease, we all understand. Finance lease, if the lease is for the major part of the economic life of the asset, it is called as a finance lease. In finance lease, in our old standard, we used to recognize the finance lease asset and the finance lease liability. But in operating lease, we do not recognize the asset and liability. So what is going to be recognized? Lease rent expense, rent expense to be recognized in P&L. Recognized in P&L. Friends, what change Ind AS 116 brought in? What change? Right, from AS 19 to old Ind AS 117, old Ind AS 17. What change Ind AS 116 brought in? What is change? Tell me. If anyone has any idea, please unmute yourself and tell me what change this standard has brought in.
Ind AS 17 talks more about rights and obligation, but Ind AS 116 is based on right of use model of the asset.
Okay, so are you saying that the old standard was not talking about the right of use and lease liability, but this new standard is talking about capitalizing the right of use asset and recognizing the lease liability? Yes. So old standard was also talking about capitalizing the right of use asset. Right of use asset means finance lease asset, okay, and lease liability. But in case of only finance lease, you agree with me, Pooja?
Yes, sir. It did
Yeah.
not say anything about that part.
Yes. So it was not talking about anything. It was not talking anything about operating lease. I am talking about AS 19 and old Ind AS 17, right? So it means from the lessee perspective, in the old Ind AS standard and old accounting standard, and the same applies to globally as well, we have two models, operating lease and finance lease, right? We have two models, operating lease and finance lease. But Ind AS 116, what change Ind AS 116 brought in? Ind AS 116 said, doesn't matter. If you have taken an asset on a lease for 5 years or for a 50 years, doesn't matter. If you are getting an asset on a lease for 5 years, you have to pay a rent for 5 years. You have to get a right of use asset for 5 years. But if you have taken an asset for 50-year lease, you will pay rent for 50 years. You will get a right of use asset for 50 years. You will get a right to use for 50 years. Okay. So standard says that there is nothing called as operating lease and finance lease in the books of, in the dictionary of Ind AS 116. It says that if you are getting a right for 5 years, capitalize the right for 5 years. If you are getting a right for 50 years, capitalize the right for 50 years. Okay. A student has come to me and he told that, sir, I want to, take a coaching of financial reporting as well as auditing. I told him, pay me for 2 classes. Another student come to me and he told, sir, I only want to take FR class. I told him, okay, pay me for 1 class. It means if you are paying more, you will recognize more as an expense. I'll recognize more as an income. If you pay less, you will recognize less as an expense and I recognize less as an income. Right? सही बात है ना? Correct? So likewise, Ind AS 116 said, IFRS 16 said, nothing doing. If you are getting a right to use, some asset, you have to capitalize this into your balance sheet as an asset on the one side, as a liability on the another side. So it means Ind AS 116 only talks about finance lease accounting. Means जो हम finance lease में करते थे ना, finance lease asset, finance lease liability. Okay. So what change Ind AS 116 brought in? Ind AS 116 brought in the single lease model. Ind AS 116 brought in the single lease model. Single lease model. There is no classification of operating lease and a finance lease from the, mind my word, from the lessee perspective. From the lessee perspective. What I've written? What I've written? From the lessee perspective. From the lessee perspective. Okay, sir. From the lessee perspective means from the tenant perspective. Right? Any challenge so far? Any challenge so far, guys? Any challenge?
No, sir. Go ahead.
So let me discuss with the help of accounting entries now. Okay. Let's say, who's there? Pooja. Pooja has taken a car on a lease rental on a yearly lease rental for lease rental of rupees 1 lakh per annum for a period of 3 years. For a period of 3 years, okay? Example. What is the accounting in AS 19 or Ind AS 17? What is the accounting in AS 19 or Ind AS 17? AS 19. First, let's talk about AS 19. What is the accounting in the books of Pooja? पूजा की बैलेंस शीट में क्या अकाउंटिंग होगी? पूजा के बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स में व्हाट अकाउंटिंग यू विल डू?
No entry, sir.
नो एंट्री, ओनली एंट्री फॉर रिकॉग्नाइजिंग द रेंट एक्सपेंस, राइट? रेंट एक्सपेंस का तो करना पड़ेगा अकाउंटिंग एवरी ईयर. लीज रेंट expense in the P&L account debit, correct, Anila?
Yes, sir. In balance sheet, no entry, but
In
P&L
balance sheet,
yes.
no entry, but in books of accounts. I'm talking in our books of accounts, right?
Yes, sir.
Credit 1 lakh, 1 lakh. Okay. What was the accounting in the old? What was the accounting in the old Ind AS 17? Old Ind AS 17 में क्या accounting होती थी? Old Ind AS 17. Ind AS 17. And within bracket, let me write that. Old version of Ind AS, which is not applicable now. What was the accounting in the old Ind AS 17? Same accounting of AS 19, same. Okay. Now, what is the accounting in Ind AS 116? What is the accounting in Ind AS 116? Ind AS 116. What accounting Pooja will do in her books of accounts? क्या करेंगे accounting? What accounting?
Recognize asset and liability both.
Recognize asset and liability, but at what value? How to recognize? So let's take an example. How to recognize this asset and liability? While the accounting entry is pretty simple, that finance lease asset to finance lease liability. These are, but in this Ind AS 116, there is no concept of operating lease, finance lease. So what we call this lease asset? What is the name of this lease asset? Right to use asset. Right to use asset account debit to lease liability. But the question is how to compute this lease asset and liability. Shall I recognize it 3 lakh? What should be the accounting? Right of use asset account debit. You all are right. right to use asset account debit, बट वैल्यू क्या लूं? मुझे तो बुक्स में रिकॉग्नाइज करने के लिए वैल्यू चाहिए ना, टू लीज लाइबिलिटी. हाउ टू अराइव एट अ वैल्यू? 3 लाख रुपीज,
Present
1 lakh
value,
multiply
sir.
by 3. Sorry.
Present value of 3 lakh.
Okay, so Anila is saying, sir, please take present value. We used to take present value in our accounting standard 19 also for finance lease, right? So we need to take a present value because today we are not going to pay 3 lakh. We are going to pay 1 lakh rupees every year. End of the first year 1 lakh, end of the second year 1 lakh, end of the third year 1 lakh, right? So this time value of money concept is there, and hence we need to take a present value. But how can I take a present value? Let's assume the discount rate of 10%. Discount rate of 10%. Let's assume the discount rate of 10%. Okay. So now compute the right of use asset and lease liability. Compute the right of use asset and lease liability. So how to compute this right of use asset and lease liability? Year 1, 2, 3. Okay. Then your amount. What is the amount? 1 lakh rupees every year. One lakh. Present value factor, PVF, at the rate of 10%. What is the present value factor? Can anyone help me? 1 divided by 1.1. What is the PVF for second year? Divide by 1.1. Third year, divide by 1.1. Okay. This is the present value factor. Then what is the present value? 1 lakh multiply by this. So the present value of 3 lakh is 248,685. 248,685. This is the accounting entry. Can you see? From no asset and no liability regime to the asset worth of 2.5 lakh approximate and liability worth of 2.5 lakh. Have you understood how these US companies were not having the asset and liability worth $3 trillion? Yeah. Have you understood now? Have you understood how this Ind AS 116 IFRS 16 has impacted the balance sheets of the companies? Yeah. So friends, this is the accounting which is given under Ind AS 116. This is the very fundamental, very basic to begin with, right? We have a lot of complexities, lot of nuances when we cover the journey of Ind AS 116. But this is something which is A, B, C, D of the entire, English literature, okay, of this leases, right? This is the alphabet, right of use asset account debit to lease liability. I hope you guys have understood it very well. Correct? So right of use asset account debit to lease liability. Sir, in accounting standard 19, every year we are debiting our P&L by 1 lakh rupees. So sir, in this case, the balance sheet entry on the initial measurement we have understood. Sir, in this case, whether any expense will not come in the P&L because you have recognized the lease asset and liability. Friends, what you were doing in finance lease, in books of the lessee, what you were doing in the finance lease, in AS 19, you are depreciating the finance lease asset over the lease period, and you are accreting, you are recognizing the interest expense on the lease liability. Same way we will do here also. Okay, friends, the first entry, right of use asset account debit to lease liability. Now I'll talk about the entry for the next 3 years, and you will be happy to see the total expense of 3 lakh will recognize in the P&L also over a period of 3 years. So let me create a lease liability schedule. Lease liability schedule. Okay. This was a right of use schedule on the initial recognition, right of use and lease liability schedule on the initial recognition. Now I'm creating a lease liability schedule for 3 years. Year opening liability, interest cost, lease payment, closing. Opening liability, interest cost, interest expense, okay, lease rent, lease payment, let me say, and closing liability. Okay. Friends, what was my opening liability at the time of initial recognition? This was my opening liability at the time of initial recognition. Okay. Interest, what is my interest expense? If I have discounted at 10%, I will also recognize an interest expense on this liability, right? Because I have to pay 3 lakh rupees and I've recognized the liability at 248,685, right? So multiply by 10%. Lease payment, what I'm going to pay every year, 1 lakh rupees. What is my closing liability? What is my closing liability? This is my closing liability. Okay. Again, I'll recognize interest expense on this amount, 10%. I'll pay again 1 lakh rupees in the second year. This is my closing liability. I'll pay 1 lakh rupees again, and my liability becomes 0. What is the total payment I have made? 3 lakh rupees I have made. What is the total interest expense I have recognized? 51,305, right? And this 51,315, this is the difference between what? This is the difference between 3 lakh and 248,685, right? This is the difference between the time value of money. I have paid 3 lakh, but the present value of 3 lakh is 248,685. The difference goes to interest cost, 51,315. Correct? Is that right? So friends, what is the accounting entry for every year? For the year 1, 2, 3. What is the accounting entry? What will go to the P&L? What will go to the P&L in the first year, second year, and third year? So let me give you the accounting entry for first year, second year, and third year. Right? First year, second year, and third year. Depreciation account debit. Depreciation on right of use asset account debit. On ROU asset account debit. Account debit. To accumulated depreciation. Okay. Or to ROU. You can write ROU as well. Write it. This is how your ROU asset will become 0. So what is the value of depreciation for ROU asset? Every year you have to divide by 3. The ROU asset is 248,685. Divide by 3. And this will become 0. Right? This ROU asset will become 0. Every year you will depreciate this ROU. This will become 0. This entry is pretty clear, just like PP intangible asset. What we have done, we have debited this ROU asset, okay, and we have debited the depreciation and credited accumulated depreciation, right? What is the total? The total depreciation debited in the P&L over a period of 3 years is how much? Over a period of 3 years, the total expense as a depreciation will be debited as 248,685. Second entry, interest expense account debit, interest expense account debit. To lease liability. to lease liability. Every year, lease liability will be increased by the interest expense and decreased by the lease rental payment. So what is my first year interest expense? So let me go to the lease liability schedule. First year interest expense is 24,869. Okay. Second year interest expense is 17,355. Third year interest expense is 9,091. Okay. Yeah, what is my total interest expense? It is 51,315. What is my total expense in P&L in 3 years? What is my total expense in the P&L in 3 years? 3 lakh rupees. What is my first year expense in the P&L? 1,07,000. In the second year, 1 lakh. In the third year, 91,000. You can see in accounting standard 19, every year there was 1 lakh rupees of expense. In Ind AS 116, in the initial year it is 107, in the second year 100, in the third year 91, in the total period of 3 years it is 3 lakh rupees. Right? Is that clear? Friends, have you understood the difference between AS 19 and Ind AS 116? Have you understood the difference? What change Ind AS 116 has brought in? Yeah? Hemant, can you unmute and can you please ask your question? I haven't understood what you haven't understood. Doesn't matter. If you want to ask, you can ask in Hindi also. Hemant, please ask your question. Unmute yourself and ask your question. Hemant, I'm not able to hear you. Hemant, are you there? Hemant is asking, sir, can you explain the liability aspect of the lease? So Hemant, honestly, I haven't understood. So if you are asking, sir, what is lease liability? So Hemant, on the day one, you are recognizing an asset, right? On the day one. So you will use this asset for the next 3 years, okay? And you will pay the liability for the next 3 years. You will pay the lease rental for the next 3 years. So what is on the day one? You haven't to purchase this asset, right? You have debited one asset. But have you paid anything today? You haven't paid anything today. You are going to pay in future. So that is why, since you are recognizing a debit, you are recognizing an asset. So you have to complete this accounting entry. You have to credit something. What you will credit? If you would have bought that flat, bought that asset from your own funds, what was the accounting entry? Asset account debit to bank account. If you would have bought this asset from a loan, what entry you will make? You will make an entry asset account debit to loan account. But if you have taken an asset on a lease basis, you are debiting a right to use that asset. But what credit you will do? The credit is again lease liability. The same accounting which we are doing in finance lease in AS 19. Okay. So, and hence that is why the present value of the lease payment, this is what we have debited as an asset and this is what we have credited as a liability. Friends, this was just a small aerial view of Ind AS 116, even though we have not started Ind AS 116 as of now. It's been 45 minutes and we still have to enter into Ind AS 116. Okay. Are you okay with the fundamental? If you have okay with the fundamental, you can solve any question which will come from any part of
every year the payment will be lease liability to bank 1 lakh, right? So that I will close the interest part and the.
Yes. What is the payment entry? Let me make a payment entry also, because every year lease liability will be increasing by the interest cost. So this lease liability has to become a 0, right? So I have made this accounting entry of this part, right, Pooja? Interest expense. Now I have to make the accounting entry of this part also. Lease liability account debit to bank. to bank credit. By what amount? By 1 lakh rupees. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, there was a power cut and hence that was a glitch. Okay, so let me share my screen again. Yeah, so Anila, this is the accounting entry, lease liability to bank. And we have paid 3 lakh over a period of 3 years. So you can see we have to pay 3 lakh in 3 years, right? So we have paid 3 lakh in 3 years. And how we have debited the 3 lakh into the P&L? Not in the form of rent. In AS 19, it was in the form of a rent. But in Ind AS 116, it is in the form of depreciation and interest cost. Depreciation and interest cost. Okay. So 2,48,000 has been debited in the form of depreciation and 51,000 has been debited in the form of interest. So friends, have you seen after Ind AS 116, the EBITDA, earning before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization of the companies have improved. Earlier it was rent expense. Now it is depreciation and interest. So the color of expense had changed, right? The geography, the color of the expense has been changed from rental to depreciation and interest, right? You agree with me? So you think like a chartered accountant. Great. Friends, let me take you into the standard again. So you can see these are the highly impacted industries. Airline is the highly impacted industry. If you see the balance sheet of Interglobe Aviation Limited, Indigo Airlines, you will find they have a big balance sheet size of 90,000 crore roughly. And you can see their balance sheet. If you see their balance sheet, so they recently they have filed the results. And let me show you their balance sheet. Friends, just allow me a minute. Let me open the results, financial results, which they have filed recently. Just allow me a minute. I'm opening the I want to show you something. Please confirm if the financial results are visible. Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Let me show you the 30th September 2024 financial results of Indigo Airlines. I have just opened their balance sheet, which they have filed in the SEBI recently. Can you see this balance sheet? Friends, can you look at in the balance sheet, what is the right of use asset? Can you tell me what is the right of use asset? 41,485 crores. 41,000 crores. 41,000 crores. What is the total balance sheet? 97,000 crores. 97,000 crores balance sheet size. Out of 97,000 crore, 41,000 crore is the largest one asset, the right of use asset. and they have a lease liability also. Can you see this lease liability? Non-current liability, current liability, lease liability. Are you able to see this lease liability? What is the lease liability? They have the lease liability close to 50,000 crores. Okay. 50,000 crores. So out of 97,000, 50% of asset and liability is due to this lease standard, Ind AS 116. Okay. Due to this Ind AS 116. Why? Because friends, this airline company used to take the asset on a lease basis, operating lease. So in the earlier standard, there was no requirement of recognizing asset and liability. But in Ind AS 116, right of use asset is required to be recognized with the lease liability. Correct? So that is why these assets and liabilities come into the picture. You can see one company has an impact worth 50,000 crores. Okay. I hope you have been able to understand now. Okay. So friends, this airline company has a big impact. And let me tell you, Sir David Tweety, who was the chairman of International Accounting Standard Board, he told in 2008 in one of the conference that one of the biggest, when he boarded a flight, he told that one of the biggest dream of my life before I die is to fly in an aircraft which is in an airline balance sheet, right? Oil and gas has a big impact. Retail industry has a big impact. They have a lot of showrooms. They have a lot of like Big Bazaar, Reliance Fresh. Have you seen this? Vijay Sales, Chroma. They all are into the rental accommodation. DMart. Okay. Telecom. They have the telecom towers on the leasehold land and leasehold roof. Okay. IT companies. So they have a big impact of this standard. Friends, the objective of this standard is to do the lease accounting in the books of lessee and the lessor. Friends, Ind AS 116 is applicable to all the leases except few assets which is not covered under the lease, like service concession arrangement. I have told you this service concession arrangement. You remember I have told you in Ind AS 115. So that is included in 115 and hence not included here. So there are few assets which will not come under the Ind AS 116. Why? Because they will come under a different standard, right? Now, the most important part, what is a lease? Right? What is a lease? And from here, officially, we are starting Ind AS 116 officially. Okay. So far, we were only talking about the story, background, fundamental, aerial view, theme of Ind AS 116. From now onwards, we are officially entering into 116 and we are going to cover one by one concepts. Okay. Are you enjoying the session? Are you enjoying the class? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Jini, Vignesh, Hemant, Anila. Okay. What about others? Others are not enjoying?
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Yes, Hemant, you are right. So even the jewelry industry, they take showroom as a lease. So jewelry industry, it is not a big impact. Everyone has an impact. Even if a company has single lease premises, even that company has an impact. I'm talking about the major impact. And that is why I have shown you the airline balance sheet. If you see the airline balance sheet, they have a major impact. 50% of assets and liability, 50% of the balance sheets constitute Ind AS 116 asset and liability, right? I'm talking about that. Okay. Talking about the lease contract, talking about the lease, identify a lease, friends. Lease is a contract between the two parties. Lease is a contract between the two parties. Okay. Lease is a contract which transferred right to use, which transfer the right to use of an asset for a period of time in exchange for a consideration. So what was the definition of lease under AS 19, under old Ind AS? The definition was lease is a contract which conveys the right to use of an asset over a period of time in exchange for a consideration. That was the definition. Lease is a contract which conveys the right to use of an asset, for a fixed period of time in exchange for a consideration. It means for covering a contract into a lease contract, there must be two or more parties. There must be a transfer of an asset, right to use of an asset, and there must be this asset must be transferred for a period of time in exchange for a consideration, not free of cost. Okay. Friends, in the old definition, lease is a contract which conveys the right to use of an asset for a period of time in exchange for a consideration. In the old definition, the word was right to use. And the right to use of an asset. But in Ind AS or IFRS, the word is right to control the use. Right to control the use of an asset, not an asset, of the identified asset. So what is the difference between accounting standard and Ind AS 116? In the earlier AS, the word was right to control the use of an identified asset. Right. Sir, what is meant by control the use? Okay. And what is meant by identified asset? How this identified asset is different from asset? How this right to control the use is different from right to use? Okay. We'll talk about this. So friends, in this standard, we will be discussing the concepts. Number one, to identify a lease contract. We will discuss the meaning of identified asset. We'll discuss the meaning of right to control the use of an asset. We'll discuss the period of time which is known as a lease term. And we will discuss the consideration as a lease payments. Okay. So these are the four aspects. Okay. These are the four aspects on which we will spend time to understand this lease. Okay. First, we will discuss the meaning of identified asset. Then we will discuss the meaning of right to control the use. If these two will satisfy, this will become a lease contract, provided there has to be a period of time and there has to be a lease payments. So we'll talk about the lease term in detail. We'll talk about the lease payments in detail. If you understand this four aspect, you will be able to understand the 50% of Ind AS 116. I can tell you. Okay. So Hemant, I will discuss your question and you will be able to understand yourself in the second class. Okay. Just hold your question. We will come on that concept. It is not a right time to discuss the concept which you are talking. Probably you are repeating this class. Okay. Or probably you have already had a session on Ind AS 116. So I am taking this standard for new student for the first time. So let me go with the flow. Okay. And you will be able to get your answer when I'll reach to the second class. Okay. I'll cover that aspect. Friends, lease is a contract which transfers the right to control the use of an identified asset for a period of time in exchange for a consideration. Okay. So we'll discuss this one by one. What is meant by identified asset? What is meant by identified asset? Friends, to become an identified asset, it has to be explicitly or implicitly written in the contract. What is meant by explicitly written in the contract? What is meant by explicitly written in the contract? Have you seen any? Sorry?
In clear terms written in the contract, mentioning all the conditions.
In clear terms, this asset has to be written in the contract, in the lease term. Have you seen the lease agreement of any house, any floor, any flat? Have you seen the lease agreement? This includes, like if I talk about lease agreement of my house, right? I'm living in Gurgaon. So in my lease agreement, it is clearly mentioned that this agreement has been entered between the lessor and the lessee, who is a Alok Garg, for a rental premises of A -- Premium Urban Society -- sector this, Gurgaon 122001 for a rental of so and so. Means specifically the address is mentioned in the contract. Specifically the property number, floor number, flat number is mentioned in the contract. Means explicitly written in the contract. Okay. What is meant by implicit contract? For example, the company has taken a power plant on a lease basis, and the lessor has only one power plant. I'm just taking an example, right? So it is written that the power plant has been given on a lease basis to this lessee for a period of 10 years. So it is implicitly, because that company has only one power plant. So that plant is given on a lease basis. So either has to be explicit. Generally the lease contract. And for becoming an identified asset, that asset has to be explicitly or implicitly written in the contract. Okay. But that asset will be considered as an identified asset if the supplier does not have a substantive substitution right. If the supplier does not have substantive right to replace the asset. If the supplier does not have substantive right to replace the asset, to substitute the asset throughout the period of use. What does it mean? What does it mean? For example, a company has entered into a contract with a transport company, right? Like you have seen in public sector undertaking or in any company has entered into a contract with a transporter to get a car on a lease basis for a period of 2 years. Okay. And they have told that we want 10 Innova car. We want 10 Toyota Innova cars. The transporter said, okay. Okay. And the transporter has mentioned that I will give you 10 Innova car, 10 white Innova car of 2024 make and model. Okay. So he has given that Innova car, but in the contract, the transporter has also mentioned that the transporter has full right to replace the car to the different cars. Right. So in initial period, the transporter has given the new cars to the company on a lease basis. These are the new cars. So whenever the transporter got a new contract, he will deploy these cars to the new contract, to the different party, to the different lessee, and he will take the old cars, comparatively old cars, to this party, to this company. It means the transporter, the lessor has the right to, the lessor has a substantive right, practical ability to exercise that right. The lessor has a substantive right to substitute the asset, replace the asset, right, for his own benefit. Friends, in this case, while the asset is explicitly written in the contract, but the lessor has a substantive right to substitute the asset, and hence it will not be qualified as a identified asset. It will not be qualified as an identified asset. Second example, the transporter has mentioned that, okay, I will give you 10 white Innova car, make and model 2024, bearing, registration number, example DL1Y2526, DL1Y2527 to up to 2535. Okay, these are 10 cars. And the company told, you cannot replace these cars. I want these cars for a period of 2 years. Okay, this car has to be there with me always. So lessor agreed, transporter agreed. But transporter told, see, in every 6 months, I need these cars for the purpose of service. Because if I'll not get the service done, this car will not be able to run on the roads. So in a span of every 6 months, I need this car for 2 days. Not to worry. For those 2 days, I'll make you a temporary arrangement. For 2 days, I'll give you the another cars, right? Or whenever the car need repair or the car got damaged, in that case, I will give you the old car. I will give you the another car, and I'll take this car for the purpose of service or the repair. Friends, in this case, whether the lessor is replacing the car for his own benefit, I mean to say, whether lessor is getting any economic benefit by replacing the cars. In this case, when he is replacing the car for the purpose of service, repair, क्या लेसोर को कोई फायदा हो रहा है?
No, sir.
पहले केस में लेसोर को फायदा हो रहा था क्योंकि वो नए कॉन्ट्रैक्ट पे नई कारें लगा रहा था ताकि उसको अच्छा कॉन्ट्रैक्ट मिले, प्राइस अच्छा मिले। बट यहां पर क्या लेसोर को कोई फायदा हो रहा है?
No.
No benefit, right? So why lessor is replacing? Lessor is replacing as a protective. He is exercising as a protective right so that his car will be maintained, right? This is the requirement. This car will be maintained, right? So friends, in this case, this is not a substantive right. This is a protective right. So lessor cannot exercise this right on a regular basis. Lessor cannot use these cars for the purpose of getting more money from the other customers, right? So friend, these are called as a protective right. So an asset will be classified as an identified asset. Number one, if it has to be explicitly and implicitly written in the contract, and lessor does not have substantive right to substitute the asset. Is that clear? Is that clear or clear? Have you understood the meaning of identified asset?
Clear in mind, sir.
Clear in mind. Very good. Second example. Have you visited airport? Please write yes or no in the chat box. I want yes or no from everyone. So when you go to airport, you will find there are, booking counters of various airlines. Correct? Booking counter of various airlines. Indigo, Air India, SpiceJet, Vistara. Now Air India and Vistara is getting merged on 11th of November, I believe. So you can see a lot of counters, booking counters of these airline companies. Are these airline companies are purchasing the space in the airport? No. They are taking the space on a rental basis. Okay. They are paying the rent to the airport authority or to the service provider who is maintaining the airport. Like Delhi airport is maintained by GMR. Mumbai airport is maintained by Adani. Okay. So they are either paying to these companies or they are paying to the Airport Authority of India. Correct. So when these companies are getting entered into the contract, in the contract, it is written that you will get a space on Terminal 3 Delhi Airport worth Delhi Airport measuring 1000 square feet. Okay, 1000 square feet. And this airport authorities have a substantive right to replace the asset. Means on one fine day, when you went to airport, you found that the booking counter of SpiceJet was in the front of, gate number 2. After 1 month, when you visited the airport, you will find the booking counter of SpiceJet is at gate number 4. So friends, the lessor has told the lessee that, I have full right to replace the asset while I'll give you 1000 square feet on the Terminal 3. But if tomorrow Costa or CCD will come, they will give me more rent. I will replace this asset with them. I will replace this premium location in front of gate number 2. I'll give the space to them. I'll give the space to you at gate number 3 or gate number 4. Till the time I'm not getting a good customer, you can enjoy your life at gate number 2. So friends, that is why the airline companies does not recognize right of use asset and lease liability. They does not recognize right of use asset in their books of accounts. Why? Because it is not an identified asset. Although it is written in the contract that 1000 square feet will be given at Terminal 3, but the asset is not identified. Today it could be gate number 2, tomorrow it could be gate number 4, right? Friends, the lessor, the Airport Authority of India has a substantive right to replace the asset. They have substantive right to replace the asset, and hence they are not capitalizing the right of use asset. Why? It is not meeting the definition of lease under Ind AS 116. Sir, what they are doing then? They are debiting the lease rent like AS 19. Whatever they are paying, rent account debit to bank, rent account debit to bank. Is that clear? So friends, for getting an asset into the lease contract, that asset has to be a identified asset. And what is the identified asset? Two conditions should met. It has to be explicit and implicit, written in the contract, and not or, and lessor does not have a substantive right to replace the asset. Okay. Third example. PepsiCo, Lays. Have you seen the Lays chips? Lays. ये लेज किसका है? पेप्सी का है ना? PepsiCo. Which company has this Lays brand? Anyone who can tell me? Pepsi. Okay. So Pepsi is manufacturing potato. They are growing potatoes and they are manufacturing chips. So they have 1,000 ton of potatoes. For that, they need a warehouse. Okay. They went to a warehouse provider. The warehouse provider told them, see, I have 20 storage spaces. I have 20 storage spaces. How much space you want? PepsiCo told that we want 20,000 square feet of space. Warehouse company told that, okay, I'll give you this. I have 20 spaces of 10,000 square feet each. Okay. So I'll give you two storage space out of 20 spaces. But I can relocate your product, relocate your items anywhere out of these 20 spaces. PepsiCo said, it doesn't matter to me. Okay. I just want a safe storage facility for my potatoes. Probably initially the slack number 1 and 2 was empty, vacant. So the potatoes were filled in 1 and 2 storage space, and then it was shifted to 11th and 12th storage space, right? So this warehouse company has a right to relocate, right to substitute the asset with another asset. This lessor has a right to replace, substantive right to replace the asset, because if someone who will come and he need the space in the front, right? In that case, this company will charge a premium and this company will provide this space to that customer, right? So friends, for becoming an identified asset, the asset has to be explicitly or implicitly identified in the contract, and the lessor does not have a substantive right to substitute the asset for his own economic benefit, right? For his own economic benefit. If it is for the benefit, if for own economic benefit. So if the lessor is exercising this, okay, on the occurrence or non-occurrence of some event like the car got accident, so the lessor has to replace the car. Okay, or the car need repair or service, the lessor has to replace the car for the temporary purpose. These rights are called as a protective right, not the substantive right. Yes, Ginny, you have the question.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Sir, you have told in the earlier example of airlines that explicit and implicit related sir, may I
Ginny,
call
you are not audible.
Hello.
Yes, Ginny.
सर मैं हिंदी में बोल सकती हूँ?
हाँ प्लीज बोलिए.
सर आपने जो अभी एग्जांपल दिया था एयरलाइन से रिलेटेड, तो उसके अंदर ये जो एक्सप्लिसिट और इम्प्लिसिट का जो कंसेप्ट है, ये हर एक एयरलाइंस के लिए होता है कि यानी कि वो लोग अकाउंटिंग स्टैंडर्ड 19 के अकॉर्डिंगली वो लोग यानी लीज लायबिलिटी शो करते हैं? क्योंकि अभी आपने जो इंडिगो की बैलेंस शीट दिखाई थी उसमें राइट टू यूज असेट शो किया हुआ था, इसीलिए थोड़ा डाउट हुआ.
Yes. So Ginny, if I talk about airline companies, they have lot of assets on the lease basis, right? The biggest asset is aircraft in which you are flying. So they took the aircraft on a lease basis. Okay. So what happened? These aircraft, they have the identified asset, right? These aircraft are identified asset and lessor cannot replace this aircraft, right? Whenever the airline company are getting the aircraft on a lease basis, they have to paint the aircraft. आपने देखा एयरक्राफ्ट स्पाइस जेट का अलग दिखता है, इंडिगो का अलग दिखता है, एयर इंडिया का अलग दिखता है, विस्तारा का अलग दिखता है ना? Right. So the lessor does not have a substantive right to replace the asset. Once this aircraft will come for a period of let's say 10 years, तो ये पूरे 10 साल वो एयरक्राफ्ट किसके पास रहेगा? लेसी के पास रहेगा. Right? The lessor will take the aircraft only for the purpose of service or repair. वो तो करना भी पड़ेगा ना, तो चलेगा नहीं एयरक्राफ्ट. Right? So this aircraft is meeting the condition of identified asset, right?
Yes, sir.
And hence right of use asset and lease liability is required to be recognized. Why? Because now this aircraft has come into the kitty of Ind AS 116. Okay.
ओके यानी वो
But
बैलेंस शीट में एयरक्राफ्ट से रिलेटेड था.
yes. But
Yes.
if you see the P&L of these airline companies, you will find one caption called it as a lease rental expense also. Rental expense also. What is that
Yes.
rental expense? Now again, these airline companies are flying aircraft, but they are also operating on the airport. They are
Yes, sir.
taking some space on the airport for issuing the boarding passes, taking the luggage, right? So they are operating on the airport. They took the space. Okay.
Yes.
So if they took the space, while it may be explicitly written in the contract, may not be explicitly written in the contract, but lessor have a substantive substitution right. The lessor can replace. And I took the example in a very layman language like gate number 2, gate number 4.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
So the lessor has a right to replace the asset, replace the space, replace the underlying asset, the space, jagah, right? So in that case, this airline company cannot recognize right of use and lease liability. Why? क्योंकि आइडेंटिफाइड एसेट की डेफिनेशन मेट नहीं करता तो लीज कॉन्ट्रैक्ट ही नहीं बना. लीज कॉन्ट्रैक्ट नहीं बना तो इंड AS 116 में नहीं आया. तो कौन सी अकाउंटिंग करेंगे? AS 19 वाली अकाउंटिंग मैंने रेफरेंस के लिए बताया. ऐसा नहीं करेंगे, लिखेंगे कि AS 19 की अकाउंटिंग करेंगे. AS 19 तो एप्लीकेबल ही नहीं है ना CA फाइनल में.
हाँ इसीलिए.
है ना? तो
Yes.
AS 19 वाली अकाउंटिंग आई एम जस्ट गिविंग यू अ रेफरेंस बिकॉज नाउ यू आर अ बिग गाइज, नाउ यू आर मैच्योर्ड प्रोफेशनल्स, राइट? मैच्योर्ड स्टूडेंट. अब आपको AS 19 पता है, मींस आप कौन सी अकाउंटिंग करोगे? एक्सपेंस अकाउंटिंग करोगे.
Yes, sir.
अकाउंटिंग तो करनी पड़ेगी ना, यू आर पेइंग रेंटल.
Yes, sir.
और आप एसेट लायबिलिटी रिकॉग्नाइज कर नहीं सकते, तो क्या अकाउंटिंग करेंगे? जब जब रेंट पे करेंगे, रेंट अकाउंट डेबिट टू बैंक अकाउंट.
Yes, sir.
आई होप द डाउट्स आर क्लियर नाउ.
Yes, sir. Very much clear. Thank you, sir.
Okay, very good. Yes. So friends, this was the concept of identified asset. Okay. Now let me take you to the Excel file and talk more concept on this identified asset, right? Just wait for a minute. Yes. So friends, for becoming a lease contract, 4 conditions should be there for making a lease contract. Right to control the use, we will discuss. Identified asset, we have recently discussed. Plus a specified period of time should be there, which is lease term, we will discuss. And consideration should be there, which is lease payment, right? So we have covered only one aspect, which is identified asset. Right to control the use होना चाहिए, identified asset होना चाहिए, एक specific period के लिए होना चाहिए और एक consideration होना चाहिए, right? So identified asset we have discussed. And what is the identified asset meaning? For the lease asset to be identified asset, it has to be explicitly or implicitly mentioned in the contract. The asset will not be considered as identified asset if the lessor has a substantive right to substitute the asset. Okay. If the lessor has a substantive right to substitute the asset. Correct? Correct. This is what we discussed. I hope the Excel is visible to everyone. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, what we have discussed now, let me again discussing an example. So example number 1, airport authority has provided the 1000 square feet space to ABC airline in front of its gate number 5. Second, airport authority has provided the 1000 square feet space to ABC airlines in front of its gate number 5. The authority can change the location in future as per its discretion. Okay, as per its discretion. So first of all, I'm asking 3 questions to all of you. In the first case, airport authority has provided the 1000 square feet space to ABC airline in front of its gate number 5. Explicit or implicit in the contract? Whether it is explicit or implicit in the contract? Yes. In front of gate number 5? Yes. Substantive right to substitute is not there. I'm saying not there. I'm telling you why. Because this airline has given a premium to airport authority and told not to worry. So I'll give you a good premium. I'll give you PLC, preferential location charges, and you cannot change my space. In that case, whether it will be identified asset or not?
Yes, sir.
Yes, as per Ind AS 116. In the second example, airport authority has provided the 1000 square feet space to ABC airline in front of gate number 5. the authority can change the allocation. जरूरी नहीं करे, कर सकता है in future as per its discretion. Explicit और implicit है या नहीं ये contract में? है, लिखा है ना in front of gate number 5.
Yes, sir.
Yes, it is there. Yes. Whether substantive right to substitute the asset is there?
Yes.
Yes. Whether it is identified asset as per Ind AS 116?
No.
No, sir.
Not an identified asset. Right? Not an identified asset. Is that clear? Not an identified asset. I hope it is clear to everyone. Right? So in this case, if it is identified asset, 116 accounting will follow. In the second case, if it is not an identified asset, 116 accounting will not be followed. Okay. Right, friends? Let's do illustration number 2. Customer XYZ. Friends, in this standard, you will find at a lot of places the word customer and supplier. What is the meaning of customer? Lessee. What is the meaning of supplier?
Lesser.
Lessor. Okay. Customer XYZ means lessee XYZ enters into a 10-year contract with supplier ABC means lessor ABC for the use of rolling stock is specifically designed for the lessee XYZ. For the use of rolling stock means machinery or a vehicle, let's say. The rolling stock is designed to transport. Generally, it is used for the word, it is used for lorry, train, the luggage train, the goods train. The rolling stock is designed to transport material used in customer XYZ production process and is not suitable for use by other customers. So this lessor has manufactured this asset for the purpose of lessee. This lessee has entered into a 10-year contract. This lessee is using this asset for the transporting the material from the production process. Okay, from the factory. Okay. And it is not suitable. This asset is not suitable for other customers. What does it mean? It means
Substitute cannot be done.
it means substantive right to substitute the asset is not there. Lessor will not get any benefit by replacing this asset because the lessor will not get another customer. Okay. So this question is indicating that. The rolling stock is not specifically specified in the contract, but supplier ABC only owns one rolling stock that is suitable for customer XYZ use. This lessor has only one train, right? And this is only as per the use of this lessee. So whether it is explicitly identified in the contract?
Implicit.
But it is implicit in the contract. It is implicit in the contract. If the rolling stock does not operate properly, the contract requires supplier ABC to repair or replace the rolling stock. So substantive right or protective right? Repair or replace?
Protective.
Protective right to protect the asset. Whether there is an identified asset. Whether this rolling stock is an identified asset. Yes, it is an identified asset. Why? First, it is implicitly written in the contract. Second, the lessor does not have a substantive right to replace the asset. Okay. Yes, the said rolling stock is an identified asset. Though the rolling stock is not explicitly specified in the contract, for example, by serial number, registration number, etc., etc., it is implicitly specified because supplier ABC must use it to fulfill the contract, right? Illustration number 3. Illustration number 3. Customer XYZ enters into a 10-year contract with supplier ABC for the use of a car. The specification of the car is specified in the contract, for example, brand, type, color, options, etc. At inception of the contract, the car is not yet built. Whether there is an identified asset?
Yes.
Why?
Though the asset is not ready to given for the lease, but it specifies clearly what type of car or asset he is wanting, and as per its requirement, the lessor will make it available for the customer.
Yes. So yes, the car is an identified asset. Whether the accounting will happen or not happen, we'll discuss later on. But simple पहला सवाल है कि car identified asset है या नहीं है इस केस में, because the student started thinking, sir, if the car is not yet built, how can he do the accounting? I'm not talking about the accounting. मैं तो पहला सवाल पूछ रहा हूँ कि कार आइडेंटिफाइड एसेट अगर आप मना कर दोगे तो 116 पढ़ाऊंगा ही नहीं, मतलब 116 के अंदर वो जाएगा ही नहीं. My first question is whether this car is an identified asset. Yes, the car is specified in the contract that what brand, what type, what color, what option, etc. Everything is stated, clearly stated in the contract. Okay, so yes, it become identified asset. For example, when you go to the tailor, right, you have to stitch a dress, you go to the tailor, he'll take the measurement. Okay, so you will give him the cloth, he will take the measurement and he will prepare that dress for you. Okay, so in that case, friends, that is specifically for you, that is an identified asset, right? You have told that I need this type of a dress, and he is stitching that dress as per your physique, as per your measurements, right? So yes, this car is an identified asset, while this cannot be identified at the inception of the contract. Means since the car is not yet built, you cannot touch and you cannot say I need this car, but the specification is specified, and hence it is written, it is said that it is implicitly specified at the time, at the inception of the contract. Okay, and the same will be made available to the customer. Okay, clear? Illustration number 4. Can you see, for a first small concept, in addition to my own layman examples, 3 for example, I'm taking again many illustrations from ICAI study material. You can understand the depth of this standard. Okay. Illustration number 4, substantive substitution right. Scenario A. An electronic data storage provider, lessor, provides services through a centralized data center that involve the use of a specified server number 10. Okay. So they have earmarked every server. This server is server number 10. The supplier maintains many identical servers in single accessible location and determines at the inception of the contract that it is permitted to and can easily substitute another server without the customer consent throughout the period of use. So this is a centralized data center. This supplier is maintaining a lot of servers, while the supplier has given the serial number to every server. And this supplier, this lessor, is providing the data storage services. Okay, and this lessor made it very clear that he can replace any server, he can substitute any server without the customer consent. Okay, throughout the period of use. Further, the supplier would benefit economically from substituting an alternative asset, because doing this would allow the supplier to optimize the performance of its network at only a nominal cost. And by replacing this asset, the supplier will also get benefited. Okay, it is optimizing his network performance, what is written in this question. In addition, the supplier has made clear that it has negotiated this right of substitution as an important right in the arrangement, and the substitution right affected the pricing of the arrangement also. Whether the substitution right is substantive and whether there is an identified asset, tell me.
There is no identified asset, sir.
There is no identified asset. Why?
Because the supplier has the right to change that.
Yes, because the supplier, the lessor, has a right to replace this asset. They have a substantive, not protective right to replace, substantive right to replace the asset. Substantive right means right for using for the own benefit, which provide the economic benefit. Okay, like for repair and replace does not provide the economic benefit, but the replacing the asset and giving it to the other customer will provide the economic benefit. Okay, so while the asset is explicitly given in the contract, but the supplier or the lessor has a right to replace also in the future, and hence this is not considered as a identified asset. Very good. Scenario B. Assuming the same fact in the scenario A, except that server number 10 is customized for the purpose of only that lessee use, only that customer use, and the supplier does not have the practical ability to substitute the customized asset throughout the period of use. Additionally, it is not clear whether the supplier would benefit economically from sourcing a similar alternative asset, whether the substitution right are substantive, and whether there is an identified asset. Tell me. What is your answer in scenario B? What is your answer in scenario B?
On substitution right is not substantive and the asset is identified.
And the asset is identified asset. Okay. So the substitution right is not substantive and server number 10 would be an identified asset because the lessor does not have the practical ability to substitute the asset and there is no evidence of economic benefit to the supplier for substituting the asset. Okay. In this case, neither of the condition of the substitution right is met, where both the condition must be met for the supplier to have a substantive substitution right. Therefore, server number 10 will be considered as a substantive, it will be considered as an identified asset. Both the condition means he has the practical ability to replace the asset. Number 2, he would economically benefit it. Correct? So friends, we have covered 3 illustrations from ICAI study material. I hope you guys have very well understood the meaning of identified asset. This kind of concept is not there in AS 19. In AS 19, the concept is asset. Okay. Right? Why? Because in AS 19, the concept of capitalizing right of use is not there. Friends, it's 8:36 now. Let's have a break for 10 minutes and we will meet at 8:46. Okay. So students, we have covered identified asset concepts. Now we are going to cover the right to control the use of an asset, right? So there are four legs of a lease contract. Number one, identified asset. Number two, right to control the use. Number three, lease period. Number four, lease payments, right? Consideration. So second aspect is right to control the use of an asset. So let me explain you with the help of an example. Vignesh is my good friend, okay? And Vignesh needs a car. I recently bought a Skoda car and I have given it to Vignesh for the purpose of the use, okay? For the purpose of the use. So friends, I told Vignesh asked that, sir, I need this car for a week. I told him, okay, Vignesh, you can take this car. Okay, you can take this car. But you cannot drive this car beyond Delhi. Okay, you cannot take this car out of Delhi. आप दिल्ली से बाहर लेके नहीं जा सकते. You have to get the fuel into this car from a petrol pump which is located in this area. So I have also given him the address of that petrol pump from which he will get the fuel. He will get the fuel in the car. I told him that only you need to drive this car, no one else, no one in your family, no one in your friend circle. Only you have to drive this car. Okay? And you have to maintain the speed of car also. You should not drive the car beyond 60 km/h. Okay. So I have given him a lot of instructions. Right? And with that, I have given car to Vignesh. Friends, whether Vignesh is getting a right to use of that car, whether Vignesh is getting a right to use that car, क्या Vignesh उस कार को यूज करने का राइट उसको मिल गया? राइट तो मिल गया. Vignesh is using that car. Who is controlling the use? Who is controlling the use? Who is giving the directions that how to use the car? Who is controlling the directions, instructions that how to use the car?
You are controlling, sir.
I am controlling, not Vignesh, right? So Vignesh does not have a right to control the use of an asset, while Vignesh has a right to use of an asset, but it does not have a right to control the use of an asset. It does not have a right to control the use of an asset. उस use को वो control नहीं कर रहा, उस asset को use कर रहा है. Are you getting me? So Vignesh does not have a right to control the use of an asset. He is having a right to use of an asset. Have you understood the difference between right to use of an asset and right to control the use of an asset? Have you understood the difference between these two?
Yes, sir.
To begin with, right? To set the context. समझ में आया? Correct? So friends, for satisfying a condition of right to control the use of an identified asset, there must be two conditions. Hemant, not to worry. If you haven't understood, I will explain it much more times. I just started, okay? So for satisfying a condition of right to control the use of an identified asset, there must be a two conditions to be satisfied. Number one, the right to obtain substantially all of the economic benefit from the use of the identified asset, right? Right to obtain substantially all of the economic benefit from the use of the identified asset. उस identified asset को use करने से largely use करने से जो भी benefit मिल रहा है वो benefit किसको मिलना चाहिए? Lessee को मिलना चाहिए. Number two, the right to direct the use of the identified asset should be lies with the lessee. Right to direct the use of the identified asset, how the asset has to be used, for what purpose. So what and how, right? How the asset has to be used, for what purpose the asset has to be used, it should lie with the lessee. To whom it has to be lied? It has to be lying with the lessee, right? So benefits from the use of the asset should lies with the lessee. Benefits and decision about the asset, decision about about the use of the asset, how to use and for what purpose the asset is used, it should be lies with the lessee. So friends, for satisfying a condition of right to control the use of identified asset, right to control the use, two sub-conditions should be satisfied. Number one, benefit from the use of the asset should lies with the lessee. Number two, decision about using the asset, means how to use the asset and for what purpose the asset is used, it has to be lies with the lessee. It has to be lies with the lessee. Have you understood this part? Have you understood or not understood? These rights should remain throughout the period of use. Okay. For example, the lease term is 5 years. So the right to control the use should be for 5 years. If the customer has the right only for a portion of a term, then the contract contains lease for that limited term only. For example, the lease period is 5 years. And for the first 3 years, it is the lessee who is taking the decision how to use the asset and for what purpose the asset is used. And lessee is getting all the economic benefit from using the asset only for the first 3 years. But after 3 years, means for the last 2 years, it is not the lessee, it is the lessor who is taking the decision. So in that case, only for the first 3 years, we can say that the right to control the use of an asset is only for the first 3 years, and hence only for the first 3 years it is coming into the definition of lease. For the next 2 years, it is outside the purview of lease definition. Sir, तो पहले 3 साल क्या होगा? पहले 3 साल के लिए हम क्या करेंगे? राइट ऑफ यूज एसेट बनाएंगे, लीज लायबिलिटी बनाएंगे, ओनली फॉर 3 year रेंटल. सर 3 साल के बाद क्या होगा? After 3 years, since the lessee does not have a right to control the use of the asset, so after 3 years, there will be a rental accounting, rental account debit to bank account, not ROU or lease liability accounting. Is that clear? What is meant by economic benefit? Economic benefit का मतलब होता है benefit which will be getting by use of the asset, by subleasing the asset, by holding the asset, right? This is the example of benefits. For example, a company has taken a car on a lease basis. So company will use the car, company will transport the material, company will carry its employee, the company will use the car as a cab facility, okay? Or the company can sublease the car. What is the benefit? Benefit could be primary output, could be byproduct or any other benefits, okay? Right? So first, let's talk about the benefit and discuss with the help of one question. So, yes, right to obtain substantially all of the economic benefit. First of all, let's understand the meaning of economic benefit with the help of this illustration. Illustration number 8. Company M&O enters into a 15-year contract with power company PQR to purchase all of the electricity produced by a new solar farm. Friends, this is a company M&O. This company is a customer, okay? And this company entered into a power purchase agreement with a power company PQR for a 15-year, right? And this company is purchasing all the electricity produced by a new solar farm. This company is a 100% customer. This company is a 100% customer of PQR. So don't you think it is just like, if you see from the lens of a chartered accountant, if you will see this transaction, if you will see this contract, it is just like a captive unit. Captive unit का क्या मतलब होता है? मतलब it is like this company M&O is using the facility of PQR for producing the electricity which is used by M&O itself. है ना? ऐसा ही है ना? Instead of taking this solar farm on a rental basis, इस कंपनी M&O ने क्या बोला? कंपनी M&O ने बोला कि एक काम करो, जो भी सोलर आपका जो भी एनर्जी प्रोड्यूस होगी वो एनर्जी मेरे को X प्राइस पे आप बेच दो, right? So rental is hidden in this case. Correct? It is 100% kind of an internal consumption. Okay. So PQR owns the solar farm. This solar farm owner is PQR, and this PQR will receive tax credit relating to the construction and ownership of the solar farm. And this lessee will receive renewable energy credit that accrue from the use of the solar farm. So who will get the renewable energy credit? Lessee. By using that asset, by using that solar farm. Who has the right to substantial benefit from the solar farm? Tell me. किसके पास substantial benefits का right है? Why MNO? Friends, company MNO has the right to obtain substantially all of the economic benefit from what? From what? From use. यूज से जो बेनिफिट आ रहा है वो किसके पास आ रहा है? पीक्यूआर के पास नहीं आ रहा है, एमएनओ के पास आ रहा है। पीक्यूआर के पास कौन से बेनिफिट्स आ रहे हैं? Owner
Who is having the actual right to use that product
who is
during the
using the asset. So lessee is one who is using the asset. मेरे पास, मैं ओनर हूं, मैंने एक फ्लैट खरीद लिया नोएडा में और मेरा पर्पस उसको रेंट पे ही देने का है। आई एम नेवर यूजिंग दैट एसेट. I am owner of that asset, but I am never using the asset. Who is using the asset? Lessee is using the asset, right? So the benefits from using the asset should lie with the lessee. In this case, the electricity produced by the farm over the lease term, that is the primary product from the use of the asset, and the renewable energy credit, that is byproduct from the use of the asset, lies with the lessee. Okay. Although PQR received the economic benefit from the solar farm in the form of tax credit, these benefits relate to the ownership of the solar farm. The tax credit do not relate to use of the solar farm and therefore are not considered and for this assessment. Okay, is that clear? Friends, we understood right to obtain substantially the economic benefit from using the identified asset. It should lie with the lessee. Second, the right to direct the use, the control of use, the right to direct the use is also lying with the lessee. Means it is the lessee who will take the decision how to use the asset and for what purpose the asset is getting used. A customer, a lessee has the right to use the asset if he either has the right to direct how and for what purpose the asset is used, or relevant decision about how the asset has to be used and for what purpose the asset is used are predetermined, and has the right to operate in that manner throughout the period of use, and the supplier does not have a right to change the operating instruction. At times, I am getting a car on a lease basis from a transporter, how to use that car. And he has written all those instructions in the lease agreement at the inception of the lease. And we have also written a clause in the contract that lessor does not have a right to change the operating instructions in future. Okay. So हम दोनों ने आपस में डिसाइड कर लिया कि ठीक है, आपकी कार है, मैंने उसको किराए पे लिया, मैं उसको यूज करूंगा इस कार को. ओके. एंड हम दोनों ने एग्री कर लिया, लेसर और लेसी ने, कि वी हैव टू यूज द कार इन दिस मैनर एंड ऑल द ऑपरेटिंग इंस्ट्रक्शंस हैव बीन कैप्चर्ड. एंड इन दिस केस द लेसर डज नॉट हैव अ राइट टू चेंज दीज इंस्ट्रक्शंस इन फ्यूचर. Friends, even in this case, it will be considered that if the conditions has been agreed in the initial period, in the initial phase, so if the right to operate has already predetermined and lessor does not have a right to change in future, it is also considered that the right to direct how and for what purpose is lying with the lessee. Okay. Or has designed the asset in a manner that predetermines how and for what purpose the asset is used and throughout the period of the use, right? With the will be throughout the period of use. Okay. The asset is designed in the manner that it has to be predetermined how and for what purpose the asset has to be used. Okay. आपका asset ही ऐसा है कि जहां पर already predetermine करना पड़ेगा. For example, missile. For example, nuclear bomb. Okay. For example, you have taken a fire extinguisher on a rent basis, on a lease basis. आपका asset ही ऐसा है जहां पर the for and what, how and what has to be predetermined. In that case, it will be considered that yes, the lessee has a right to direct the how and what of the use of the identified asset. Okay. The supplier may have protective right, which typically define the scope of the customer right, but does not prevent him from having the right to control the use of the asset. For example, I have given a car to Vignesh and I told Vignesh that Vignesh, you cannot run this car. It was a diesel car And the diesel car limit is 10 years only. The diesel car limit is 10 years only. So when Vignesh took the car from me, I have already completed 9 years and 10 months. So only 2 months are yet to go. And I'm going to USA and I'm given this car to Vignesh for the purpose of using that car. I have not given any instruction. I only told Vignesh, please keep in your mind that, this car should not run on the roads of Delhi after 10 years. Only 2 months has to go. Okay. So friend, is it a kind of instructions I'm giving for the controlling the use of the asset, or is it more like a protective instruction? It is more like a protective instruction, because if after elapse of 10 years, if Vignesh will use that car on the road of Delhi, the traffic police will seize that car. Second, I told Vignesh that Vignesh, please get the pollution certificate also issued, because my pollution will get expired in after 15 days. Third instruction I've given to the Vignesh, don't drink and drive the car. And please don't carry any explosives, any bomb in my car. Friends, if you have taken a house on a rent, you must have seen the landlord will say that you cannot, we are not allowing your friends to enter after 10 p.m. in the night, right? Or you cannot play loud music in the floor because it will disturb the neighbors and it will disturb our sleep. Have you seen this kind of instructions? Have you heard these kind of instructions from your landlord? आपने कभी सुना है नहीं सुना है, या आपने एज अ लैंडलॉर्ड कभी इंस्ट्रक्शन दिया है नहीं दिया?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So these are not kind of a substantive instruction. These are kind of protective instructions, right? These are more like protective in nature. Okay. So friends, identified, we have understood identified asset. And for the asset to be satisfied, the definition of right to control the use of an asset, the right to control the use should be throughout the period of use. If it is for a limited period, we can take this limited period only for the purpose of taking it under Ind AS 116. For satisfying the condition of right to control the use, the lessee should get the economic benefit from using the asset, and it is the lessee who will direct how the asset is getting used and for what purpose the asset is getting used. Okay, is that clear? Okay, my friends, so let me again take you back on the Excel file. And friends, after identified asset, we have also understood the concept of right to control the use of an asset. Friends, have you understood the right to control the use of an asset? Have you understood or not understood? Yes or no? Clear from mind. To control the use, benefit from use of the asset should lies with the lessee. Benefits first, and decision about the asset. Benefits किससे? Benefits from use of the asset. किसके पास होना चाहिए? Benefits from use of the asset should lies with the lessee. Second, decision about the asset. How to use and for what purpose, it has to be lies with the lessee. Very good. Let's do more questions. Okay. Illustration number 7. ABC Limited enters into a contract with XYZ Limited, which grant ABC Limited exclusive right to use a specific grain storage facility over a 5-year period in the month of May and June. Okay. So there is a season in May and June. There is a season for these grains, and this company ABC Limited has entered into a contract with XYZ Limited for getting an exclusive right to use a grain storage facility, use a warehouse over a year period in the month of May and June. During these months, ABC Limited has the right to decide which crops are placed in storage and when to remove them. How and what purpose? It is decided by ABC. XYZ provide the loading and unloading services for the warehouse activity. During the another 10 months each year, XYZ Limited has the right to determine how the warehouse will be used. Okay. For the 2 months, the right to direct the use, how and for what purpose, it is decided by the lessee for the 2 months, May and June. For the remaining 10 months, it is decided by the lessor. Which party has the right to control the use of the identified asset during the period of the use? Tell me. Friends, in the above case, ABC Limited, the lessee, ABC Limited was the lessee, yes, has the right to control the use of the identified asset during the period of use because they have the power to determine how the warehouse will be used during the contractually defined usage periods. Okay. The analysis should focus on the rights and economics of the use of the warehouse for the specified usage period May and June. During the period of use, ABC Limited has the right to determine how much of a crop to place in a storage and the time placing and removing it from a storage. These rights are more significant to the economics of the use of the asset than loading and unloading services performed by XYZ during the same period. ABC Limited receives all the economic benefit from the use of the asset during those specified time periods. Therefore, contract contains a lease for the specified period of the term. ये 5 साल का कॉन्ट्रैक्ट था, हर एक साल में 2 महीने के लिए. तो इस 2 महीने में कौन यूज कर रहा है? एबीसी. कौन डायरेक्ट कर रहा है? एबीसी, राइट? Who is directing the how and what of using the asset? ABC, right? Who is getting the benefit? ABC. So this is an identified asset. Of course, this lessee is having a right to control the use of an asset. Okay. Is that clear, my dear friends? Is that clear or not clear? Is that clear or not clear?
Yes, sir.
Clear? Okay. These all questions are from study material. First, we took illustration number 2, then 3, then 4, then 8, then 7. Okay. This is what we have covered. Friends, now let's discuss illustration number 9. And I want you to read this illustration and answer that illustration. Friends, I am taking a pause of 30 seconds. Please read this illustration. Please read the illustration. I'll directly need the answer of this.
Customer has right to direct the use.
Customer has a right to direct the use of an asset.
Yes.
Okay,
He
let
is
me see.
right to control the use of how and what to use that asset.
Okay, so let me look at what about others. So let's wait for another 2 minutes. Let me read this illustration. Customer X means lessee enters into a contract with supplier Y means lessor to use a vehicle for a 5-year period. You have to read this question just like me. The only difference is in the examination hall, you cannot read like me. अंदर ही अंदर पढ़ना है, बोल बोल के नहीं पढ़ना. Okay. Customer X enters into a contract with supplier Y to use a vehicle for a year period. Okay. 5 साल का period. The vehicle is identified in the contract, explicitly or implicitly identified in the contract. Okay. Supplier Y cannot substitute another vehicle unless the specified vehicle is not operational. For example, breakdown. Okay. Means protective right hai. Substantive right to replace the asset is not there. Okay. It means up in the first paragraph, it is identified asset, right? In the first paragraph, it is an identified asset. Okay. Okay. Under the contract, customer X operate the vehicle, that is drive the vehicle or direct others to operate the vehicle, for example, hire a driver. So understood, it is customer X who is directing how to use the asset. Okay, and for what purpose that is used. Either customer X himself drive or customer X will hire the driver. Understood. It means seemingly right to control the use lies with customer X, but I'll not conclude. I'll read the next part of the question. Customer X decide how to use the vehicle. Okay. How to use the vehicle within contractual limitation, right? अगर आप रेड लाइट क्रॉस करोगे तो आप गाड़ी तो ट्रैफिक पुलिस वाला सीज करेगा ना, पॉल्यूशन नहीं होगा, टाइम पीरियड एक्सपायर हो जाएगा, तो ट्रैफिक पुलिस के पास राइट है. So because there is a contractual limitation. For example, throughout the period of use, customer X decide where the vehicle goes as well as when or whether it is used and for what it is used. customer X can also change this decision throughout the period use. Okay. So by reading of these two paragraphs, we can conclude that customer X is having a direct to use the asset, means it is customer X who is directing for what purpose and how this asset is getting used. How and what. Supplier Y, lessor, prohibits certain uses of the vehicle. For example, supplier Y says that you cannot take my vehicle to Sri Lanka and you cannot modify my vehicle. Okay, of course, you cannot modify my vehicle to protect its interest in the asset. Friends, is it an operating instruction or is it like a protective instruction?
Protective instructions.
Protective instructions. Whether customer X has the right to direct the use of the vehicle throughout the period of use?
Yes.
Yes.
Sir.
It is customer X who is controlling the use of the asset. It is customer X who has a right to control the use of the asset. It is customer X who is deciding how and what, for what purpose and how this asset is going to be used. Okay. Yes, customer X has the right to direct the use of the identified asset throughout the period of use because it has a right to change how the vehicle is used, when or whether the vehicle is used, where the vehicle goes and what the vehicle is used for. Supplier Y's limit on certain uses for the vehicles and modification to it are considered protective right that define the scope of customer X's use of the asset, but do not affect the assessment of whether customer X direct the use of the asset. Okay. Whether this question is clear to all of you or it is not clear, tell me. Is it clear to all of you or it is not clear, guys?
Clear.
Clear? Clear in mind or clear from mind?
Clear in mind.
Sir.
Is it a identified clarity or it is not a identified clarity?
Identified clarity, sir.
Identified clarity. Okay. Identified clarity. Very good. Very good, friends. So, friends, let's go to the next part. Okay. Illustration number 11. Entity L enters into a 5-year contract with company A, a ship owner, for the use of an identified asset, identified ship. Okay. Entity L entered into a 5-year contract with company A. Company A is the lessor, who is the owner, and entity L is the lessee. Entity L decide whether and what cargo will be transported and when and to which ports the ship will sail through the period of use. Subject to restriction is specified in the contract. In the contract, it was written that whenever there is a high tide in the sea, whenever there is a high tide in the sea, that ship will not float. It is more like a protective restrictions. Okay. These restrictions prevent entity L from selling the ship into waters at a high, carrying explosive materials as a cargo. Company A operates and maintains the ship and is responsible for the safe passage. Who has the right to direct the use of the ship during the period of use?
Entity L, the customer.
Yes, sir.
But entity A has also given a lot of instructions, a lot of restrictions.
Contractual restrictions, the protective.
It is more like a protective rights. Entity L has the right to direct the use of this asset. The contractual restrictions are protective right in the scope of its right of use. Entity L, lessee, determines how and for what purpose the asset is used throughout the 5-year period, because it decides whether, where, and when the asset sails, and well as the cargo that will transport. Lessee has the right to change this decision throughout the period of use. Therefore, the contract contains a lease. Okay. Okay, friends. We have covered this part in detail, and we have covered around how many illustrations? We have covered total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 illustrations. In addition to 5 lemon example which I have taken. Right. I hope you guys have understood it very well. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Friends, now I'm moving to the next concept. Inception of the lease and commencement of the lease. Have you heard about this term, inception of the lease and commencement of the lease? Have you ever heard about this term in IAS 19? inception of the lease, inception date of the lease, and commencement date of the lease? Friends, what is the difference between inception date of the lease and commencement date of the lease? And what is the meaning of inception date of lease and commencement date of lease? Let me explain.
Inception is
Please.
period or the date when the actual agreement for the lease is being made or contract is entered, while commencement is the actual execution of the lease. The date where the commencement is started means the actual use or the terms are coming into effect.
Very good. Very well explained, Pooja. Inception date of the lease is a date when the terms and condition of the lease has been agreed or the contract has been entered. Okay. Commencement date of the lease is the date when the actual execution happens. For example, let's say Hemant came to Delhi for the purpose of taking the coaching of CA classes. Okay. So he came to Delhi for doing his CA. He come to Lakshmi Nagar. So I have a building in Lakshmi Nagar. And what happened? I have a building in Lakshmi Nagar. And Hemant wanted to take this flat on a rent basis from 1st of April. He came in the middle of February to me, and on 15th of February, he told that, sir, I need a house. So I want to come on 1st of April to Delhi. And at that point of time, I need a flat to live in. Okay. Flat to live here. I told Hemant that, okay, Hemant. So on 15th of February, we decided, I told Hemant, I'll take a security of 1 month and I'll take an advance rent, which is 15,000 per month. So we decided the rental, we decided the deposit, we decided the everything. And I told Hemant that, Hemant, it is a 2-bedroom house and I cannot allow more than 3 students in that house. Okay. He told, yes, sir, we 3 friends are coming, and everything was decided on 15th of February. Okay. And I told Hemant, okay, I'll give you the key of my flat on 1st of April. So the execution of this lease agreement, all the terms and the principal terms and conditions of the lease has been decided on 15th of February. And on 1st of April, Hemant will started using this underlying asset. This underlying asset will be provided to Hemant, will be transferred to Hemant, okay, on the 1st of April. So in this case, what is the inception date and what is the commencement date?
15th February inception date and commencement is 1st April.
15th February is the inception date when the principal terms of the condition has been agreed or the lease agreement has been entered. Both. It could be both. It could be either or. Okay. And 1st April is the date when the underlying asset has been transferred for the purpose of the use. Okay. Right. Since on 15th of February, the asset has not been transferred to the lessee, whether any accounting will happen on 15th of February, the right of use asset, lease liability, whether Hemant will do any accounting in his books of accounts?
No, sir.
No, Hemant will not do any accounting on the inception date. So accounting will always start on a commencement date. Accounting will start on a commencement date. Okay, but inception date pe kya hoga? Identification of lease. Identify a lease, whether it is a lease or not a lease. Iska kya matlab hua? Is it an identified asset? Whether right to replace, substantive right to replace is there. Aapka terms and conditions define na. Payment to ho gaya hai, right? So it is identified asset. Who is controlling the right to control the use of the asset? So all these will be decided and it will be identified whether it is a lease or it is not a lease. Agar right to control the use is lying with me as a lessor, to kya hoga? Although it is identified asset, but I as a lessor control the right to use. Kya hoga 15th February ko?
No lease.
It means it is not a lease contract. It is not a lease contract from the purpose of Ind AS 116 accounting. Right? You might be confused, sir. ऐसा मैंने तो lease agreement sign किया है. Are you getting me? Isha, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Probably you can say, na, sir, we have signed the lease agreement. How can you say that it is not a lease? It is not a lease from the perspective of Ind AS 116 accounting. Right? Under Ind AS 116 accounting, this will not trigger a lease. Okay. Right? Sir, if it will not trigger a lease, then how accounting will happen? You have to do expense accounting, expense rent account debit to bank, rent account debit to bank, rent account debit to rent payable to bank, rent account debit to landlord, landlord to bank, rent account debit to lessor, lessor to bank. This is what accounting will do. So friends, on the inception date, it has to be identified whether it is a lease or not a lease. Okay. Second, it is from the perspective of lessee and lessor both. But from the lessor perspective, friends, this standard does not classify any operating lease, finance lease from the lessee perspective. The biggest change from the old standard to new standard, the biggest change in Ind AS 116 is Ind AS 116 has a single lease model from the lessee perspective. You remember I have told you from the lessee perspective, single lease model. मैंने लिखा था कहीं पे कि from the lessee perspective. I've written somewhere. Where I've written?
In the starting, sir.
In the starting, in the Excel file, I've written that change Ind AS 116 brought in. Ind AS 116 brought in single lease model. There is no classification of operating lease and finance lease. Okay. From the lessee perspective, there is no classification. Right? But from the lessor perspective, lessor to owner होता है ना, मालिक होता है ना. From the lessor perspective, there is a still the lease has to be classified between finance and operating lease. Okay. आपको सिर्फ अभी इतना ही ध्यान रखना है. I will discuss the lessor accounting separately. समझ आया? On the inception date of the lease, on this date, the parties will identify is it a lease contract for under Ind AS 116. Second, the lessor will classify is it an operating lease or is it a finance lease. That's all. Okay. Commencement date of the lease. On the commencement date, the parties has to recognize the lease transaction. The lessee has to recognize right of use asset and lease liability. Okay. The parties has to recognize the lease transaction. The party has to determine the lease term. Determine the lease term. Lease term determine करना क्यों important है? जब तक lease term determine नहीं होगा, time value of money कैसे निकालोगे? For example, lease term is 5 years. You have to take 5-year rental. You have to discount it to the present value. Okay. So commencement date is a date on which a lessor makes an underlying asset available to for the purpose of use by the lessee. On this date, the parties will determine the lease term and the parties will recognize the lease accounting. The parties will do the lease accounting. Okay. On the 1st April, Hemant will recognize right of use asset and lease liability. I hope the inception and commencement part is clear to all of you. Yes, guys?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I have covered out of 4 aspects. What 2 aspects I have covered? Out of 4 aspects in the definition of lease, there was 4 parts in the definition of lease. What 2 parts I have covered? In the definition of lease, there were 4 parts. What 2 parts I have covered? मैंने कौन-कौन से part cover कर लिए?
Right to control and identified asset.
Right to control and identified asset. These 2 aspects I have covered. Now I need to cover what? Lease term. I have to cover a specified period of time, which is lease term. Okay. Now let's discuss the meaning of lease term. Very, very, very important. Very, very. Friends, let's say Hemant. Okay. Myself and Hemant has entered into a contract for a period of 3 years. For a period of 3 years. Okay. And I told Hemant that Hemant, out of this 3-year period, 2 years will be a non-cancelable period. Okay. And after 2 years, you can vacate this house as per your discretion, or I can get this house vacated as per my discretion. Means both of us can mutually agree on the vacation of the house. Agree on vacating the house. But 2 years is the non-cancelable contract. If before 2 years you decide to vacate the house, you have to pay me the rent for this entire 2 years. or if I will tell you that please leave my house, I will compensate you to the extent of this 2 years. Okay. मतलब अगर मान लो हेमंत ने बोला कि सर 1.5 साल के बाद 1.5 year के बाद, if Hemant decided to vacate that house, Hemant has to pay me a rent for 6 months. Or after 1.5 year, I told Hemant to vacate the house, I'll pay him the rent of 6 months. So out of this 3-year period, 2 year is a non-cancelable period, and 1 year is a kind of a period where either of the party can cancel the contract. Friends, in this case, what is the lease term?
2 years.
Sorry?
2 years, sir. 2
2
साल.
years. 2 साल. But you will say, sir, मेरे लीज कॉन्ट्रैक्ट में तो 3 साल लिखा है, आप 2 साल क्यों बोल रहे हो? 2 year for the purpose of this lease accounting under Ind AS 116. अगर वो 1 साल और रुक गया तो 1 साल और का रेंट तो देगा, राइट? तो उसकी अकाउंटिंग कैसे होगी? एक्सपेंस की अकाउंटिंग होगी. बट डोंट यू थिंक 2 year तो पक्का है, नॉन कैंसिलेबल पीरियड इज पक्का. बट डोंट यू थिंक इफ टुडे this contract is for 3 years, so whatever is 1 year period, okay, and in the 1 year period the party has a right, or the party not has an option to cancel the contract. Okay, so don't you think if the party has an option to terminate the contract, you need to see whether that party is willing to exercise his option to terminate the contract. Correct? As a lessee, if I am taking a house for a period of 3 years, right? 2 years is a non-cancelable period. 1 year period is at my option. I have an option to terminate the contract after 2 years. So don't you think when I'm recognizing this right of use asset and lease liability, I need to consider this 1 year period also?
Yes,
I
sir.
need to see what are the chances that I'm going to avail the option of living in this house for the next 1 year also. I have to do that. Yes or no? Otherwise, what will happen? For the first 2 year period, the accounting is right to use asset and lease liability. For the last 1 year, the accounting is rent to bank. अलग अलग हो जाएगी ना accounting एक ही contract में, या नहीं होगी?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So friends, standard says that if a lessee, no. So what is a lease term? Standard says the lease term includes a non-cancelable period plus if there is an option to terminate the lease and lessee is reasonably certain that he will not exercise the option to terminate. So what is a lease term? Lease term is equal to non-cancelable period plus optional termination period. Lease period is a non-cancelable period plus optional termination period, right? If the lessee is reasonably certain not to exercise the optional termination period. Okay. अगर लेसी रीजनेबली सर्टेन है कि वो टर्मिनेशन ऑप्शन एक्सरसाइज नहीं करेगा, तो आपको उस 1 साल को भी इंक्लूड करना है लीज टर्म में, राइट? सो इन दिस केस व्हाट विल बी योर लीज टर्म? इफ लेसी इज रीजनेबली सर्टेन, आई एम रीजनेबली सर्टेन, आई विल नॉट एक्सरसाइज द टर्मिनेशन ऑप्शन.
Then 3 years.
3 years. Very good. Or so I have entered into a contract with the lessor and the contract was 2 year non-cancelable period, 1 year optional termination period, optional period, and this contract has a renewal period of 3 year also, a subsequent renewal period of 3 year also, right? The first subsequent renewal period. Friends, standard says that if a contract includes optional renewal period as well, optional renewal period, okay? Period to renew. If the lessee is reasonably certain that the lessee is going to avail the optional renewal period, that optional renewal period is also going to be added in your lease term. So in this case, I'm reasonably certain that I'm going to exercise the optional renewal period also. In this case, what will be the lease term?
I would include the renewal period also.
So how much is the lease term? 6 year. 6 year is the lease term, right? Okay. Sir, how can somebody say that, okay, I'm going to avail the optional renewal period of 3 year also after 3 year? So for example, the lessor has told that if you will avail the renewal option, I will give you a 25% discount in comparison to market rental, right? And you have taken that property for the purpose of running your CA office, for running your chartered accountant office, right? It is your business address, business location. Would you like to change your business location if you are getting a benefit in future, which is agreed today itself, right? It is less likely that you will not, it is less likely that you will change, okay? It is more likely that you will avail the optional renewal period. Or you guys have seen the CA offices, which is on a rental basis. These chartered accountants have done a lot of expenses on the furniture and fixtures. Furniture and fittings में करते हैं ना, leasehold improvement में बहुत सारा खर्चा करते हैं.
Yes.
They are making a lot of partitions, making a meeting rooms, fixing a lot of almiras, doing false ceiling, right? They are doing a lot of expenditure. If you have seen the offices of Big Four, they've done a lot of modifications, okay? They do a lot of leasehold improvements. So the lessee has done such a leasehold improvement, heavy leasehold improvement, that it is reasonably certain that the lessee is going to avail the renewal option. Okay. So friends, your lease term is equal to non-cancelable period plus optional renewal period if the lessee is reasonably certain to exercise that option, plus optional termination period if the lessee is reasonably certain not to exercise the termination option, plus rent-free period also, plus rent-free period. Sir, what is meant by rent-free period? Friends, I'm just giving a practical example. Have you guys, are you aware about Ambient Mall in Gurgaon? Are you aware about Ambient Mall in Gurgaon? किसी ने गुड़गांव में एम्बियंस मॉल के बारे में सुना है? एम्बियंस मॉल नहीं सुना तो कोई बात नहीं. So there is a mall and it is one of the largest mall in Gurgaon or in Delhi NCR. So Ambience Mall. In Ambience Mall premises, there is an Ambience corporate tower. Okay. So this Ambience corporate tower is run by Ambience Corporate Development Private Limited. It is a lessor. This company provides the spaces to the corporates in the Ambience corporate tower. And typically they make a lease agreement for 12 years. And you know how this lease agreement runs? These lease agreements are 9 year. First 9 year is a non-cancelable period where you have to pay rentals. There is a lock-in of 9-year period, and the last 3 year is a rent-free period. The last 3 year is a rent-free period. Tell me, for the purpose of accounting, will you take a lease term of 9 year or 12 years? Will you use that premises for 9 year or 12 year on day one? What is your judgment say? Hemant is saying 12 year. Nisha is saying 12 years. Why 12 years? Why 12 years?
In that 12 years means in extended 3 years last period, I can still use the asset.
Okay. So there is a high chances why you will leave that premises. If you paid a rent for 9 years, the last 3 years is a rent free, right? Even you will take the position, even you continue the position of that premises. Okay, you will lock that premise, you will continue the position, you will use that premise as your, for example, warehouse, or you will sometimes visit that premises. If you will take into the custody, it is high chances because you don't have to pay anything, right? Zero rental, because you have paid for 9 years, the last 3 years is a rent-free period. So there are high chances that you have to use that rent-free period also. Okay. You can sublease also, right, Sumit? So friends, in that case, the lease term is equal to 12 years. So friends, what is the definition of total lease term? The definition of lease term is equal to non-cancelable period plus rent-free period plus renewable period if the lessee is reasonably certain to exercise the renewable period, plus optional termination period if the lessee is reasonably certain not to exercise the termination period. जहां पर renewal period है वहां पर लिखा है reasonably certain to exercise, जहां पर optional termination period है वहां पर क्या लिखा है reasonably certain not to exercise. तो इस वर्ड का थोड़ा ध्यान रखो. Termination is negative to renewal, right? Termination is opposite to renewal. So you have to take the renewal period when there is a reasonable certainty you will exercise. Whenever there is an optional termination period, there is a reasonable certainty not to exercise. Okay, is that clear? Clear or clear? Clear or clear? So friends, let me discuss this lease term on Excel file again, and then I'll come to few illustrations. Okay. I hope my Excel file is visible. Please confirm if my Excel file is visible or not visible. Please
Visible,
confirm.
sir.
It's visible. Very good. Okay. So lease term is equal to non-cancelable period plus rent-free period plus optional renewal period plus optional termination period Okay. So friends, let's discuss the lease term. We are discussing the concept of lease term. What is my lease term? Lease term is equal to what? NCP, non-cancelable period plus rent-free period plus optional renewal period plus optional termination period. Optional renewal period when there is a reasonable certainty to exercise that renewal period. Optional termination period whenever there is a reasonable certainty not to exercise the termination period. Okay. Now we'll discuss with the help of example. Ambient Mall Limited entered into a contract with Haldiram's to provide a space for outlet on a lease basis for 10 years, right? So कितने साल का contract है? 10 साल का है. The initial 6 months will be a rent-free period, and further 5.5 year will be a non-cancelable period. And if any party default, they have to bear the rental cost up to this period. What is the lease term with respect to Ind AS 116? बताइए, इतनी सी इंफॉर्मेशन दी हुई है, बताइए लीज टर्म क्या होगा इस केस में? What is my lease term? Lease term is equal to NCP plus RFP. NCP plus RFP. What is my NCP? What is my NCP? What is my RFP? NCP is equal to 5.5 years. What is my RFP? It is 0.5 years. What is the total? 6 years. The total is 6 years. Okay. The total is 6 years. Right. Now I am extending this example. Okay. I am extending this example. Ambient Mall Limited entered into a contract with Haldiram for 10 years. The initial 6 month rent-free period, further 5.5 year will be a non-cancelable period. Any party in default, they have to bear the rental. The lessor has also provided a lease renewal option for up 2 years and agreed that in this 2 years, the rental cost will be 20% lesser than the market rental. Okay, lesser than the market rental. So friends, 6 साल तो नॉन कैंसिलेबल रेंट फ्री पीरियड है, नॉन कैंसिलेबल पीरियड है, और लेसोर ने बोला कि अगर आप 2 साल और रुकते हो तो इन दैट नेक्स्ट 2 years, क्योंकि 6 years के बाद there is a no non cancelable period. In after 6 years, anybody can cancel the contract, right? So the lessor has also provided a lease renewal option for a period of 2 years and agreed that in this 2 years, the rental cost will be 20% less than the market rental. So friends, what is the lease term with respect to Ind AS 116? क्या होगा lease term? In this case, my lease term will be what? My lease term will be what? Lease term क्या होगी? Non-cancelable period तो होगी. Non-cancelable, let me write completely. Non-cancelable period. NCP कितना है? 5.5 year, sir. 5.5 year. RFP भी है, रेंट फ्री पीरियड भी है। कितना है? RFP 0.5 ईयर भी है। सर और भी कुछ है क्या? ऑप्शनल रिन्यूअल पीरियड भी होगा, ऑप्शनल रिन्यूअल पीरियड भी होगा, प्लस ऑप्शनल रिन्यूअल पीरियड, ORP, ऑप्शनल रिन्यूअल पीरियड। कब करेंगे? ओनली व्हेन द लेसी is reasonably certain to avail the renewal option. Okay. So in this case, why you are saying that the lessee is reasonably certain to avail the renewal option? What is indicating you to take this judgment? What is indicating you to take this judgment, friends? आपको क्या इंडिकेट कर रहा है इस जजमेंट को लेने के लिए?
20% less than market rentals.
20% discount. 20% discount is indicating, right? So 2 years. What is your lease term? Your lease term is 8 years in this case. Example को और complicate करें? Should I complicate this example more?
Okay, sir.
No?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So let me complicate this example more. Ambience Mall entered into a contract with Haldiram for 10 years. Initial 6 months rent free period. आपको पता है ना मॉल में शुरू में रेंट फ्री पीरियड क्यों होता है? फिट आउट पीरियड होता है. डोमिनोज, हल्दीराम, लुइस फिलिपी, पीटर इंग्लैंड, right? Ellen Soli, Hush Puppies. So these all malls give some free rent-free period, like a fit-out period, because in the first 3 to 6 months they are not able to earn any income. Okay, 6 month rent-free, 5.5 year non-cancelable. Any party default 6 year ka rental. In the last 4 years, I have changed the question. In the last 4 year, the lessee has the option to terminate the lease by giving only a 1 month notice. They have spent like anything. They have spent in crores. The rent is in lakhs. They have spent in crores. What is the lease term with respect to Ind AS 116?
10 years.
Let me again discuss the lease term. What is lease term? What is the non-cancelable period in this case?
5.5.
5.5.
What is the rent-free period in this case?
0.5.
0.5.
0.5. What is the optional renewal period in this case?
0.
Optional renewal period.
0.
Zero. कुछ दिया है question में? Zero.
No.
What is the other aspect? Optional termination period. Optional termination period. OTP. कौन सा OTP? वो नहीं जो आपके पास OTP आता रहता है ना, लॉग इन करते हो, वो सब वो OTP नहीं. ऑप्शनल टर्मिनेशन पीरियड. ये कब लेंगे ऑप्शनल टर्मिनेशन पीरियड? ओनली व्हेन सेम लिख दूं, only when the lessee is reasonably certain to
Not to exercise.
not to avail the termination option, right? So what is the optional termination period? 4 years.
4.
So why you have included this optional termination period? Tell me why you have included.
Because let's say I think a huge leasehold improvement. If he takes decision to terminate, probably he will shift on to another contract, and in that case, he will also require such huge cost to start the whatever the process he has.
Very good. Fantastic. Yes. So since the lessee has done huge leasehold improvement, there are high chances that lessee will not vacate the premises. Okay. Is that clear? So there is a high chances, it is reasonably certain that the lessee will not exercise this termination option, right? So friends, I hope this example has given you some benefit to understand this lease term understanding. Yes or no? No?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now let's come to illustration number 16. Entity ABC enters into a lease for equipment that includes a non-cancelable term of 6 years and 2-year fixed price renewal option with future lease payment that are intended to approximate market rates at lease inception. Okay. So 6 year is the non-cancelable period and there is a one renewal option of 2 year. And the future lease payments are at a market rate. Okay. There are no termination penalties or other factor indicating that entity ABC is reasonably certain to exercise the renewal option. There are no termination. There are no termination penalties or other factor. So there is no any factor which indicate that entity ABC will avail the renewal option. मतलब कोई ऐसा कोई फैक्टर नहीं दिख रहा जिससे आप कह सकते हो कि एंटिटी एबीसी विल reasonably certain to avail the renewal option. What is the lease term in case of scenario A?
6 years. Yes.
6 year. Okay. 6 year. At the lease commencement date, the lease term is 6 year, being the non-cancelable period. The renewal period of 2 year is not taken into consideration since it is mentioned that entity ABC is not reasonably certain to exercise the option. सीधा ऐसा मेंशन किया हुआ नहीं है इसमें, एग्जाम आंसर में ऐसा लिखा है स्टडी मटेरियल में, बट सीधा मेंशन नहीं किया, इंडिकेट किया है. लिखा है ना, there are if you have to write in the exam, you have to write like, since it is given in the question that there is no factors which are indicating that ABC is reasonably certain to exercise the renewal option, and hence we will consider that ABC does not have a reasonable certainty to exercise this renewal option, and hence we will not consider this 2-year period for the lease term. Scenario B. Entity XYZ enters into a lease for a building which includes a non-cancelable lease. What? Non-cancelable lease. Term for 8 years and a 2-year market price renewal option. 6 + 2. Before it takes possession of the building, entity XYZ pays for leasehold improvements. The leasehold improvements are expected to have significant value at the end of 8 years. And that value can only be realized through continued occupancy of the lease property. और जो लीज इंप्रूवमेंट उसने किया है उसकी लाइफ 8 साल से भी ज्यादा है, और अगर वो बीच में छोड़ते हैं तो उसका कोई यूज नहीं होगा. द एंटिटी, द लेसी कैन नॉट टेक द लीजहोल्ड इंप्रूवमेंट्स अलोंग विद द लेसी, राइट? सो इन दिस केस व्हाट विल बी द लीज टर्म? द लीज टर्म विल बी नॉन कैंसिलेबल पीरियड प्लस ऑप्शनल टर्मिनेशन पीरियड इज प्लस ऑप्शनल रिन्यूअल पीरियड इज गिवन
10 years.
Whether we will consider this 2-year optional renewal period?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it is 6 + 2. Sorry, it is 8 + 2.
8 + 2.
8 + 2. Okay. So 10 year is the lease period. At the lease commencement, entity XYZ determines that it is reasonably certain to exercise the renewal option because it would suffer a significant economic penalty. Economic penalty matlab loss, not penalty, if it is abandoned the leasehold improvement at the end of initial non-cancelable period of 8 years. Thus, at the lease commencement, entity XYZ conclude that the lease term is 10 year. Okay, being 8 year of non-cancelable period plus optional renewal period of 2 years. Right? Scenario C.
Sir,
Entity PQR. Sorry.
सर ममता
Yes, Mamta.
सर ए में यहाँ पे लिखा हुआ है देयर आर नो टर्मिनेशन पेनल्टी और अदर फैक्टर्स इंडिकेटेड दैट एंटिटी एबीसी इज रीजनेबली सर्टेन टू एक्सरसाइज द रिन्यूअल ऑप्शन. तो हमने रिन्यूअल ऑप्शन को क्यों नहीं लिया सर इसमें?
Yes.
यहाँ
हमने
तो है
renewal option
इंटेंशन है.
क्यों नहीं लिया?
Yes,
So, Mamta, if you read this question, in the scenario A, it is written that एंटिटी एबीसी का नॉन कैंसिलेबल पीरियड है 6 ईयर का, राइट? और एक उसके पास रिन्यूअल का ऑप्शन भी है 2 साल का.
yes sir.
ऑप्शन है, राइट? और वो जो रिन्यूअल ऑप्शन है, उस रिन्यूअल ऑप्शन में जो रेंट होगा वो मार्केट रेंट ही होगा. आप चाहे प्रॉपर्टी यहां लो चाहे प्रॉपर्टी वहां लो, कहीं भी लो, जो मार्केट रेंट है आपको वही लगेगा. आपको कोई बेनिफिट नहीं मिल रहा रिन्यूअल करा के, करेक्ट? और पहले सिनारियो में ये लिखा कि अगर आप छोड़ के जाते हो तो कोई टर्मिनेशन पेनल्टी भी नहीं है, मतलब 6 साल के बाद अगर छोड़ के जाते हो तो देयर इज नो टर्मिनेशन पेनल्टी, मींस यू विल नॉट हैव एनी इकोनॉमिक लॉसेस, राइट। एंड इट इज ऑल्सो रिटन इन द क्वेश्चन कि और कोई दूसरे फैक्टर भी नहीं है जो ये इंडिकेट करते हैं कि हाँ आप रिन्यूअल कराओगे, कोई दूसरे फैक्टर भी नहीं है। सो
राइट सर,
कैन
बट
यू अंडरस्टैंड, सॉरी,
यस सर, सर ये तो समझ गए
हैव यू
मैं,
अंडरस्टूड?
बट
ओके,
यहाँ लिखा हुआ है ना कि रीजनेबली सर्टेन टू एक्सरसाइज द रिन्यूअल ऑप्शन, सर्टेन
so
टू
Mamta, you have to read this full sentence. There are no termination penalties or other factor indicating, there are no termination penalty or no other factor which
ओके
will
ओके सर,
indicate,
ओके राइट
which
सर,
will indicate, right?
राइट
So question में ही लिखा है ऐसा कि कोई है ही नहीं। जैसे जब सिनारियो बी में आए तो क्वेश्चन साइलेंट हो गया, बट क्वेश्चन ये कि उसने लीजहोल्ड इंप्रूवमेंट काफी मेजर की हुई है और लीजहोल्ड इंप्रूवमेंट की अच्छी खासी वैल्यू बची है 8 साल के बाद भी बचेगी, क्योंकि आप डिसीजन डे 1 पे ले रहे हो फ्यूचर का। इसीलिए you have to exercise, you have to take some judgment while concluding whether you will renew or you will renew, whether you will exercise the termination period or you will not exercise the termination period, right? Scenario C, entity PQR enters into a lease for an identified retail space in a shopping center. The retail space will be available to entity PQR only for only the month of October, November, and December during a non-cancelable term of pay. The lessor agrees to provide the same retail space for each of the 7 years. What is the lease term?
3 months per year into 7 years, that is 21 months. Because it is the period during which it is actually available for use for the entity PQR.
Very good. Have you ever visited any mall? आप लोग मॉल में तो गए होंगे। आपने कभी मॉल में देखा विंटर्स के टाइम पे देयर इज अ तिब्बतियन और चाइनीज वुलन मार्केट? हैव यू सीन द वुलन स्टॉल इन द मॉल? आपने
Yes,
देखा
sir.
होगा ना, वो सिर्फ 3 महीने के लिए आते हैं, 3-4 महीने के लिए, राइट? सो दीज आर सीजनल सेलर्स, राइट? वो अभी दिल्ली में है, फिर कहीं चले जाएंगे। तो what they are doing, like typically in the ambience mall, there is a company which is into the woolen clothes. So in the winter months, in November, December, and January, in these 3-4 months, they always put their stall in a particular premise in ambience mall, right? So if this company has entered into a contract for 3 months, not for the 12 months, for 3 months, for a period of 7 years. So what is the lease term? In that case, the lease term is not 7 years. The lease term is a period of use. It is 21 months. Okay. At the lease commencement, the lease term is 21 months, 3 months per year, over the 7 annual period as specified in the contract. That is the period over which entity PQR control the right to use the underlying asset. In the remaining 9 months, it is ambience mall who is using that premises, using that space at his own whims and fancies, right? वो अपने हिसाब से यूज करता है, लेसी का कोई कंट्रोल नहीं है, लेसी का कंट्रोल सिर्फ 3 महीने के लिए, right? So we have also covered this illustration number 16, my dear friends. Okay. Now, what happens with the termination clause? I need to discuss the termination clause and then I'll conclude the session for today. Friends, there is an additional guidance given for termination clause, right? For example, if both the parties have a right to terminate, in that case, whether optional termination period will be considered or will not be considered. For example, there is a contract of 10 years. 6 years is a non-cancelable period. The last 4 years, any party, being a lessee or a lessor, any party can cancel the contract by giving a 1-month notice, for example. Any party can cancel the contract. Means this cancellation right is with both the parties to terminate the lease without any major penalty, right? So without any major penalty, without any penalty, both the party can cancel the contract. Or if both the party, any of the party have to cancel the contract, they have to pay 1 month rental. So it is not a significant part. Clear है ना? अगर both the party have the right to cancel the contract, have the option, not the right, have to option to cancel the contract. if both the parties have an option to cancel the contract, option to terminate the contract, in that case, optional termination period will not be taken into consideration for computing the lease term. Is that clear? Clear है आपको ये? Standard says that if both the parties have a right to terminate, in that case, the optional termination period should not be taken into the consideration for defining the lease term. So what is the lease term in this case? 6 years. मतलब आपको वो भी नहीं देखना कि आपके पास reasonable certainty है या नहीं है right to not to terminate. If only lessee has the option to terminate, then लेसोर के पास टर्मिनेशन राइट नहीं है, सिर्फ लेसी के पास टर्मिनेशन राइट है, तो क्या होगा?
Lessee, whether he will exercise that right or not, we have to assess this.
Yes, in the first case, since the right was with both the parties, so the termination period, optional termination period, was not required to be considered. But in the second case, the right only lies with the lessee. So in this case, you have to check whether there is a reasonable certainty to not to exercise the termination option. And if answer is yes, you need to consider the optional termination period in the lease term, like we have done in Haldiram case. Okay. Like we have done in the scenario B. Okay. If only the lessor has this right, lessee does not have a right to terminate. You are the lessee. You don't have any right to terminate. For you, the period is 10 years. क्या करेंगे? क्या period होगा? I am talking about lessee. From the lessee perspective, you are identifying the lease term. So what is the period for you? What is the lease term for you? If only the lessor has a right to terminate, in that case, lessee will always consider the optional termination period as well. Because from the lessee perspective, lessee always wants to avail that space. Okay. Is that clear? Is that clear, my dear friends? From the lessee perspective, when you are identifying the lease term, okay, if both the parties have a right to terminate, don't take optional termination period. If only lessee has the option to terminate, please take optional termination period. Please take optional termination period if the lessee is reasonably certain not to exercise the termination option. But if the lessee does not have a right to terminate, आप तो lessee की तरफ से lease term निकाल रहे हो, आपके पास termination का right ही नहीं है, तो आप कैसे निकालोगे? Reasonable certainty तो आपको निकालना ही नहीं है ना. हेमंत, आर यू गेटिंग मी? आपको ऑप्शनल टर्मिनेशन पीरियड कब कंसिडर करना है? जब आपके पास रीजनेबल सर्टेनिटी और नॉट टू टर्मिनेट. यहां पर आपके पास ऑप्शनल टर्मिनेशन पीरियड है क्या? आपके पास है? नहीं है ना. नॉन कैंसिलेबल पीरियड प्लस रेंट फ्री पीरियड प्लस ऑप्शनल रिन्यूअल पीरियड प्लस ऑप्शनल टर्मिनेशन पीरियड, आपके पास तो 10 साल ही है ना टोटल. Suppose the term of a contract is 10 years and the non-cancelable or lock-in period is 6 years. The lease term shall be as follows. Now I am discussing the concept or illustration from ICAI study material. If the termination option is with lessor, सिर्फ lessor के पास है termination option. What is the lease term for lessee? What is the lease term?
Full period of
Full.
10 years.
The lease term shall be 10 years because even after 6 years, the lessee would be contractually bound till 10th year. ऑप्शन ही नहीं है ना, फॉर्मूला में डालोगे कहां? आर यू गेटिंग मी? भाई ओटीपी तो तब देखोगे ना जब ऑप्शन होगा. ऑप्शन ही नहीं है लेसी के पास. Because even after 6 years, lessee would be contractually bound till 10th year. That is, lessee cannot refuse to make the payment till the expiry of the contract and also has the right to use the asset till 10th year unless lessor terminate the contract. If termination option is with lessee, then
Reasonably certain period we will assess.
Then 10 year, if there is a reasonable certainty not to exercise the termination period. 6 year, if there is a reasonable certainty that yes, he will going to avail the termination period, right? So it depends. If both the parties have a right to cancel, right to terminate, then
Only 6 years.
only 6 years, because after 6 years, either party can terminate the contract without taking the consent of the other party, and hence the contract is not enforceable after 6 years only in case there is an insignificant penalty for termination, right? Okay, friends, is that clear? Is that clear or not clear?
Clear in mind, sir.
Clear in mind? Thank you so much. So we have discussed this lease term is let length. Why lease term is important? Why 6 year, 10 year? क्या फर्क पड़ेगा इससे?
Valuation purpose के लिए.
Oh, very good. Valuation purpose. So if you will conclude that lease term is 6 year, you will take the rental for 6 year. You will discount it to present value, right? For 6 year rentals. But if you will take for 10 years, you will take the 10-year rental. You will discount for 10 year. So the longer the period, the longer will be right to use asset, the larger will be the lease liability. Correct. Anyone who has not understood the concept which we have started since now, friends. So one of the student has a question, sir, if we don't understand AS 19, can't we understand Ind AS 116? 100% you can understand Ind AS 116. Friends, let me clear. It is not a revision session. It is a full-fledged learning sessions, right? I am explaining each and every concept with theory, then with layman examples, and then with the ICAI study material illustration. तो ये आपका रिवीजन सेशन नहीं है, आपका लर्निंग सेशन है, पहली बात. दूसरा, why I am comparing with AS 19 so that you will have more clarity. आपके माइंड में रजिस्टर हो जाए. Because you know, the problem with CA student is always, you guys are also doing your training, articleship. और जब आप आर्टिकलशिप करते हो ना, आपके पास दोनों तरह के क्लाइंट हो सकते हैं, जो अकाउंटिंग स्टैंडर्ड फॉलो करते हैं और जो इंड एएस फॉलो करते हैं, राइट? सो यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट इंड एएस इज डिफरेंट फ्रॉम अकाउंटिंग स्टैंडर्ड, राइट? एंड सिंस आप सीए फाइनल में हो तो आपने एएस 19 पढ़ा है, कोई बात नहीं, आप भूल गए, कोई बात नहीं. मैं एएस 19 पढ़ा भी नहीं रहा, बट थोड़े बहुत कॉन्सेप्ट तो आपको याद है ना. आपने ऑपरेटिंग लीज, फाइनेंस लीज का नाम तो सुना ही होगा ना. आपको ये तो पता ही होगा ना, रेंट अकाउंट डेबिट टू बैंक, ये तो सबको ही पता है, ये तो 11th क्लास में भी हमने सीखा था. करेक्ट? एम आई मेकिंग अ सेंस टू एवरीवन?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that is why I am relating it with AS 19, because this standard is significantly different than AS 19 from the lessee perspective. Okay, lessee accounting has significantly changed in comparison to our old AS and old Ind AS also. Correct? So this is why I am also telling you in between, I am also telling you that how it is different. Okay. So great, Ginny, and I love your feedback. So she is writing that, sir, today we could not feel when the time has gone. Enjoyed the whole lecture very much. Thank you so much. So thank you, Ginny, for this wonderful feedback. Yes, Pooja, please ask your question.
Sir, in practical exam, are we expected to come or face any type of question in which two different aspects of a solution will be asked, one from the Ind AS perspective and from AS perspective?
No, never.
Practically
In my,
also.
so as far as knowledge is concerned, as far as my experience is concerned, no.
Okay.
In your exam, your question will always be from Ind AS.
Okay.
Right? Okay. So friends, today we have discussed the Ind AS 116 and we discussed why Ind AS 116 came, why IFRS 16 came, we discussed that. Then we discussed the definition of a lease. Lease is a contract where when there is a right to control the use of an identified asset has been transferred for a specified period of time in exchange for a consideration. Then we discussed meaning of identified asset, which is an asset where the asset has to be explicitly or implicitly mentioned in the contract, and lessor does not have a substantive right to replace the asset. Number two, the right to control the use of identified asset, which is with the lessee, means the benefits, largely substantially the benefits from use the asset should goes to the lessee, and it is the lessee who direct how and for what purpose the asset is going to be used. Then we discussed the meaning of lease term. Lease term includes the right to terminate, don't take the optional termination. Friends, if the lessee has the optional termination period, if the lessee has the optional termination period, I mean to say optional termination option, then you need to see whether it is reasonably certain, to exercise or not to exercise. If it is reasonably certain not to exercise a term, can take the have a right to terminate, lessor has a right to terminate. You are not required to take the non-cancelable period. Okay. No problem, Pooja. Thank you so much for your feedback as well. No problem at all. But you are very interactive. I must say, you are very interactive in the sessions, and you used to respond to the point. So thank you, students. If you have any question, I would be happy to answer in the next 2-3 minutes. Otherwise, I will be happy to conclude the session. Any question? Shall I say good day? Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Take care. Ashok ji, session is over. Yes. Thank you, Ashok ji.